Chapter 362. The inner sect disciple who had just said, "Dog bite dog," had a gloomy expression on his face. He looked at Sue-yi indifferently and said in a deep voice, "I said, get out here." Sue-yi said word by word, looking straight at the inner sect disciple. He already knew that the inner sect disciple was the one who said that. A dog biting another dog, a mouthful of fur. These words were naturally referring to Sue-yi and those outer sect disciples. Sue-yi was infuriated by the inner sect disciples' mockery. "Looks like you don't know how high the sky is just because you have some strength. Fine, I'll teach you a lesson today." The inner sect disciple's face turned ashen. An outer sect disciple dared to disregard him in front of so many people. How could he tolerate this? A cold light flashed in his eyes. If he didn't teach this outer sect disciple a lesson today, he wouldn't be able to face anyone in the future. Before the inner sect disciple could finish his sentence, he was slapped by a series of crisp slaps. The slaps were pleasant to the ears and echoed in the training hall. Before anyone could react, the inner sect disciple spat out a mouthful of blood along with his teeth. His pale face was swollen red like a pig's head. The inner sect disciple was stunned. He felt dizzy and his body swayed. His mind was blank and his eyes were dull. Everyone was stunned by this scene. They were even more shocked than Sue-yi, Luanfei, and the outer sect disciple. There was no doubt that the one who slapped him was Sue-yi. Sue-yi's figure had unknowingly appeared in front of the inner court disciple like a ghost. "Watch your mouth in the future," Sue-yi said with a stern look. "I'm not done with you." The inner sect disciple finally reacted. The pain on his face told him that he had been slapped hard. Boom. How could the inner court disciple possibly endure such humiliation? He was instantly enraged as his eyes turned gloomy. A cold glint of killing intent shot out from his eyes. The aura of a third-level Yuan profound realm gushed out from his body as he unreservedly sent a palm strike towards Sue-yi's chest. Humph! A cold glint flashed across Sue-yi's eyes as he shook his arm. Similarly, a scorching hot fire-type Yuan Qi gathered into a finger and directly shot out towards the palm that was getting closer and closer to him. Everything happened as fast as lightning. Everyone watched as blood mist spurted out from the inner sect disciple's palm and a bloody hole was formed. Their eyes were filled with shock. At this moment, the inner sect disciple finally realized that the outer sect disciple in front of him was not a rookie like he had imagined. With such strength, it was impossible for him to be an outer court disciple. With a miserable shriek, the inner sect disciple's body was sent flying backward, blood spurting from his mouth as he slammed into the ground. Blood flowed out of his palm. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. An inner sect disciple couldn't even withstand a single blow. Seeing that an inner sect disciple couldn't even withstand a single blow, the outer sect disciple who had been beaten by Sue-yi earlier was even more shocked and felt his scalp go numb. Beside the inner sect disciple who was sent flying, the other inner sect disciples who were clustered around him had a drastic change in expression. They wanted to help, but when they saw that the former couldn't even withstand a single blow, and then looked at Sue-yi, they felt a formless and terrifying aura. Their hearts trembled for no reason, and they wanted to help, but they were also afraid. "Sue-yi, I remember now. He's the outer sect disciple who severely injured Wang Qi of the 15th Sword Peak last night." Suddenly, a voice from the crowd couldn't help but exclaim. A youth's gaze trembled as he spoke. He finally remembered. Sue-yi, wasn't he the outer sect disciple who was rumored to have severely injured Wang Qi yesterday? It's him, he's from the 36th Sword Peak. Suddenly, many disciples in the training hall were in an uproar. Many of them had heard about the incident yesterday, saying that an outer sect disciple had severely injured many inner sect disciples. They were skeptical at first, but at this moment, the truth seemed to be right in front of them. Zhang Qing was a little helpless. He wasn't surprised by what had happened. Ba Yi's dozens of inner sect disciples in the morning had been defeated, so these guys were nothing. Let's go, or we'll be in big trouble. Then, Zhang Qing seemed to have thought of something and said to Su Yi, "Wait a minute." Su Yi's lips curled into a smile, and he immediately stepped forward to the side of the severely injured inner sect disciple. "What else do you want to do?" The disciple was shocked. His pig-like face was filled with horror. He struggled to get up and subconsciously stepped back. "I just want to take something." Sui looked calm and stretched out his hand. Soon, a space bag appeared in Su Yi's hand. "How dare you give it back?" The inner sect disciple was stunned. When he came to his senses, his face changed greatly. "Give it back what? This is the price for your cheap mouth. I'll keep it for you for a few days." Su Yi curled his lips and put the space bag into his arms with ease. All the disciples in the training hall were dumbfounded. There was actually an outer sect disciple who was so arrogant that he even dared to snatch the inner sect disciple's space bag. The inner sect disciples were even more shocked. This was the first time they had seen such a thing. An outer sect disciple didn't take them seriously at all. He even waited for them to see and snatch the inner sect disciple's space bag. This was definitely the first time the Divine Sword sect had experienced something like this. The outer sect disciples were shocked at this moment, but they were secretly pleased. Usually, these inner sect disciples didn't take them seriously. Even if they were from a sword peak, they could only bow and scrape, hoping to get some guidance from these inner sect disciples. At this moment, when they saw the inner sect disciples being humiliated in front of the outer sect disciples were delighted, but they didn't dare to show it on their faces. "Let's go quickly. If we fight here, we'll definitely alarm the punishment hall disciples." Zhang Qing's expression was solemn. This was the training hall. If they fought here, they would be punished. "Su Yi, come out if you dare." Suddenly, amidst the shock and astonishment of the crowd, a thunderous sound that was mixed with primordial qi spread into the training hall. The voice didn't sound old, but its aura was extremely powerful. Such a voice immediately surprised all the disciples in the sword hall. Su Yi looked up slightly and followed the voice outside the training hall. The voice came from outside. Could it be that the punishment hall disciples have been alarmed? Zhang Qing's eyes trembled, and his expression changed drastically. Once the punishment hall disciples were alarmed, it would be a big deal. Chapter 2 of the original version equals part I/. It seems that someone is here to cause trouble. The disciples around the training hall whispered. "Let's go and take a look." Su Yi smiled at Zhang Qing, indicating that there was no need to worry, and strode away. This is trouble again. Chapter 363. Let's go and have a look. Su Yi turned around and said to Zhang Qing, who was in a daze, "I hope they are not from the torture hall." Zhang Qing was helpless. He could only hope that they were not from the torture hall. Even if he was an inner disciple who dared to fight in the training hall, once he fell into the hands of the torture hall, he would not be able to escape easily. Moreover, Zhang Qing knew that the young man in front of him was not a disciple of the Xinjian Gate. How could he not be worried? Let's go. However, Su Yi did not take it seriously. He waved his long sleeves and strode out of the training hall. Zhang Qing followed, and the disciples of the training hall immediately followed behind him. They would not miss this opportunity to watch the show. There were many people in the small square outside the training hall at the moment. There were many figures coming from all directions. There were many ferocious flying savage beasts in the air. They were ferocious and ferocious. They flapped their wings and hovered in the air, causing dust to fly around. Waves of vigorous primordial qi diffused from many people and rippled in the small square. At the moment, there were more than 20 young men in different clothes in the center of the square. However, everyone had the exact same emblem on their bodies. That was the symbol of the Divine Sword sect's disciples. There was a difference in color from the emblem on the ordinary outer sect disciple's body, representing the identity of an inner sect disciple. At the moment, the vigorous chi that was rippling in the square was also diffusing from the bodies of these 20 young men, intertwining and enveloping the whole square. Under such a powerful chi, the inner and outer disciples of the various sword peaks, who were obviously here to watch the show, did not dare to get too close. These 20 young men stood in the center of the square and were the most eye-catching. The expressions on their faces were equally cold and expressionless, as if they were waiting for something. Did Su-yi come to the training hall? This time Su-yi is in big trouble. He is going to suffer. How can he not suffer? He stripped Ba-yi and threw them there. I am afraid that this has angered the entire 15th Sword Peak. Su-yi is too arrogant. That senior brother Hua Dongqiu. He came in person. At the periphery of the small square, whispers could be heard constantly as people whispered to one another. However, no one dared to raise their voices. Pirate version NQ. Obviously, these onlookers were very interested in what was going to happen next. Otherwise, they wouldn't have chased after him in such a hurry. When Su-yi walked out of the training hall, he immediately felt the interweaving of figures outside. His gaze swept across the entire square without leaving a trace, and then landed on the 20 or so particularly eye-catching youths in the center of the square. There were more than 20 young men, all around the age of 20. Their auras were very vigorous. Ripples flashed across Su-yi's eyes. These 20 youths were all inner disciples of the Shunjian Gate. From the ripples of Yuan Qi that they had deliberately emitted, there were already 3 of them at the first level of the origin spirit stage. In his 20s, he had already reached the first level of the origin spirit realm. With such a cultivation level, he could definitely be considered to be extraordinarily talented. Su-yi guessed that all of them were at least of the so-called king grade and above. Finally, Su-yi's gaze landed on the leader of the group. He was dressed in a long battle robe, with a slender figure and a stern look on his face. The badge on this youth's body was a little different from the other inner disciples. There was no aura surging from his body, but Su-yi couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. He's here. Who's that Su-yi? As Su-yi walked out, the group of disciples following behind him immediately caused quite a commotion. Zhang Qing followed behind Su-yi, and immediately looked towards the square. Seeing that they didn't seem to be from the disciplinary hall, his expression immediately relaxed. However, it was only for an instant. Zhang Qing's relaxed expression immediately froze. His expression changed greatly, and his body trembled for no reason. He lowered his voice beside Su-yi and said, "Not good, it's Hua Dongqiu." "Who is Hua Dongqiu?" Su-yi lowered his gaze and asked Zhang Qing. "The personal disciple of the 15th Sword Peak." Zhang Qing's body couldn't help but shiver. Personal disciples, even inner disciples, couldn't compare to them. Personal disciples not only represented a kind of status, but also a synonym for strength and talent. Those who could be accepted by elders and other experts were inner disciples. On the other hand, only those who were formally accepted as disciples by the elders and other experts and addressed each other as master and disciple were considered personal disciples. Being a direct disciple also meant that they would be able to obtain more cultivation resources from the Divine Sword sect, and would be able to receive the teachings of the elders. In Shenzhen Gate, any personal disciple also represented absolute strength. The 15th Sword Peak, personal disciple. Su-yi raised his eyebrows, and his gaze once again fell on Hua Dongqiu, sizing him up. Personal disciple, the true representative of Shenzhen Gate's generation. Su-yi sized up Hua Dongqiu. He was indeed extremely extraordinary. Although this person seemed to be slightly older than Xiongzhan, Hu Qi and the rest, his cultivation was also at the origin spirit stage. He estimated that he was at least at the second level of the origin spirit stage, and would not be inferior to Xiongzhan and Hu Qi. Chapter 364. Everyone's eyes were filled with astonishment and curiosity as they carefully sized up the young man with shoulder-length black hair. His face was not pale, but his facial features were extremely well-defined. "He's quite handsome." Many female disciples were laughing softly as they looked at the young man. His eyes under his slender eyebrows suddenly flashed with a deep and bright light. His seemingly thin figure was incomparably tall and straight. His bronze skin gave people a kind of sparkling and translucent texture. He was dressed in the divine sword sect's outer disciple attire, but it couldn't hide his special temperament. "He's not handsome, he's a little charming," a female disciple said. The young man named Su-yi had a special temperament that seemed a little arrogant, a little evil, and a little naughty, which made the girls feel an inexplicable sense of closeness. What's the use of being handsome? Is he as handsome as senior brother Huadongqiu? He's going to be in trouble later. When some of the youths heard the girls beside them praising the young man, they immediately felt a little displeased in their hearts. "You're Su-yi." As Su-yi's voice fell, the gazes of the 20 or so inner disciples on the 15th sword peak fell on Su-yi in unison. Their gazes turned cold, and the unfriendly look on their faces could not be expressed with words. Obviously, they had all been to the 36th sword peak and had seen the fate of Ba-yi and the others. They did not pay much attention to the fact that Ba-yi had gone to the 36th sword peak today. However, when they heard the news and hurried to the 36th sword peak, they saw that Ba-yi and the others had been surrounded and their faces turned ashen. Dozens of inner disciples had been stripped naked in public. This was not only a humiliation to Ba-yi and the others, but also to all the disciples on the 15th sword peak. It was a humiliation to the 15th sword peak. However, among the 20 or so inner disciples, there were some who had a complicated look in their eyes. It was obvious that they were wary of Su-yi. After all, they knew Ba-yi's strength. He was about to step into the origin spirit stage. What's more, Ba-yi still had a trump card. His true battle prowess was even capable of contending with ordinary essence spirit stage practitioners. Even though Ba-yi had only been able to contend against Huadongqiu, it was enough to show how outstanding he was. Otherwise, senior brother Huadongqiu would not have allowed Ba-yi to go to the 36th sword peak this morning. In the end, Ba-yi ended up in such a sorry state. More importantly, Ba-yi was not alone. There were many inner disciples with him, but they were all beaten up and couldn't even withstand a single blow. Therefore, even though these 20 or so young men had powerful auras and cold gazes, they were still somewhat fearful of Su-yi. "Captain, it looks like they're about to attack. What should we do?" In the distant sky above the square, a huge flying mount had appeared at some unknown time. It had a wingspan of over 100 feet, and there were several stern-looking young men on it. They were looking down with concern. "It's Huadongqiu. This guy is not easy to deal with. Let's observe the situation first." On the back of the flying barbaric demonic beast, a yellow-clothed young man stood tall and straight. He had an extraordinary aura and a handsome appearance. He looked down at the situation below and seemed to be a little apprehensive as he spoke faintly. "Is something the matter?" In the field, Su-yi's expression was calm as he spoke to the youth who had asked the question. "Good, it's good that it's you. Do you want to come with us, or do you want us to do it?" The stocky young man continued as he stared coldly at Su-yi. "Is there something wrong with your brain? Why should I go with you?" Su-yi looked at the young man and said, not paying much attention to him. Zhang Qing, on the other hand, was so shocked that she was speechless. She stood behind Su-yi, her body trembling. "Good, you are indeed arrogant." Cool P. Craftsman Net E Original O version. Hearing Su-yi's words, the sturdy young man did not seem surprised. However, the sneer on his face became even more sinister as he said sinisterly, "I have to say that you are the most arrogant person I have ever seen." "Very well, as I wish, I can only take you away." With your cultivation at first level essence spirit stage? I'm afraid that's not enough. Su-yi looked at the sturdy young man, who was one of the 3 first-level essence spirit stage disciples. His gaze swept across everyone on the 15th sword peak as he said, "Don't provoke me, go back to where you came from. Or else, you will end up like that mysterious Bai, Wang Qi and Ting Ming." Huff. Upon hearing Su-yi's words, the entire field could not help but turn silent for a moment. The gazes of the crowd could not help but twitch as gasps were soon heard. This fellow was simply touching a sore spot in front of Huadongqiu and the rest. He was undoubtedly rubbing salt on the wound of the 15th sword peak. How arrogant was he! In front of a group of inner court disciples, and more importantly, in front of an essence spirit stage disciple and a direct disciple, Su-yi was still so arrogant. "Kid, you're courting death." The sturdy young man's expression immediately turned extremely dark. Cold light gushed out from his body as the aura on his body suddenly surged, about to attack. However, at this moment, Huadongqiu, who had been silent all this while, opened his mouth and waved his hand. Without leaving a trace, he blocked the sturdy young man and took a step forward. Looking at the rather calm and somewhat arrogant Su-yi, Huadongqiu's eyebrows slightly raised as he said, "I can see that you do have some ability. With your ability, you should not be an outer court disciple, nor should you be a nobody. However, I have no interest in knowing these things. All I know is that you have done something wrong, so you have to pay the price. You have provoked someone you should not have provoked, and this price will be unforgettable for the rest of your life." Huadongqiu's words were rather calm, but the coldness and sharpness contained within them was something that anyone could hear. The faces of the Xinjian Gate disciples present secretly trembled. Everyone knew that Huadongqiu would not let this matter rest today. The sturdy young man, who was originally about to attack, immediately retreated a little when he saw Huadongqiu. However, his gaze towards Su-yi grew even more sinister. "I heard that you're a direct disciple?" Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Su-yi's expression was still as calm as usual as he looked at Huadongqiu. "Huadongqiu." Huadongqiu nodded his head and said indifferently. However, this indifferent expression revealed disdain from the tip of his brows. However, his self-cultivation from a young age prevented this disdain from showing on his face. "It doesn't matter what your name is. What's important is that if there's nothing else, go back to where you came from. Do not provoke me, or I will not be polite." Chapter 365. As his indifferent words fell, the surrounding crowd was already stunned and the entire place was in an uproar. In front of Huadongqiu, this fellow actually did not put him in his eyes. This was simply too arrogant. The expressions of the disciples on the 15th sword peak were even colder. The aura on their bodies had already completely surged, causing the entire place to tremble. "You are even more arrogant than I imagined. Perhaps you have some ability, but today your arrogance in Xinjiang Gate will come to an end." The cold expression on Huadongqiu's face also changed. At the same time, he looked straight at Su-yi. That gaze that no one dared to look straight at was filled with coldness. Su-yi looked indifferently at Huadongqiu. His arms were crossed in front of his chest, and the broken sword on his back was very eye-catching. With a deep gaze, Su-yi looked around at the disciples on the 15th sword peak and said, "I will say this for the last time. Do not provoke me again. You are courting death. This kid is too arrogant." Boom. Boom. Tsk. As Su-yi's words rang out, the disciples on the 15th sword peak could not hold back any longer. They fiercely stomped their feet on the ground, and some of them tightly gripped their swords. In an instant, waves of vigorous yuan qi gushed out without holding back. Waves of aura converged, forming a mighty force that caused the surrounding onlookers to stagger backwards. There were more than 20 waves of aura, and amongst them were the aura of the yuan spirit stage. It was very powerful. Oh no, Zhang Qing was in a daze. Under the waves of powerful aura, he was already trembling. Looking at the youth in front of him, Zhang Qing was already unable to describe it. This fellow was too arrogant. Even in the face of a direct disciple like Hua Dongqiu, he was still so arrogant. He really did not treat himself as an outsider. I understand you. You want to rely on your ability to stand out in Xinjian Gate and become an inner disciple as soon as possible. Hua Dongqiu looked at Su Yi, his expression gradually darkening. He coldly said, "But unfortunately, you will not have the chance. Your limelight will completely end. Come at me together, stop being so noisy." Su Yi looked around. It seemed that if he didn't make a move today, he wouldn't be able to leave. Too arrogant. Su Yi's attitude caused Hua Dongqiu to lose control of himself. His face turned cold as he raised his arm and gripped the sword in his hand tightly. Buzz! The sword chime was like wind and thunder, and a dazzling light burst out. A fierce aura swept through the square, causing people to tense up and find it difficult to breathe. Treasure. Su Yi's deep gaze landed on the treasured sword in Hua Dongqiu's hand, his eyes burning with desire. The treasured sword in Hua Dongqiu's hand was clearly of an extraordinary level. Su Yi estimated that it was definitely above the level of Yuan weapon and profound weapon, as expected of a large sect. Su Yi muttered in his heart, feeling rather moved. As expected of a large sect, the weapons in the hands of every disciple were extraordinary. Boom! Hua Dongqiu gripped his sword tightly and stomped his foot on the ground. He pointed his sword at Su Yi, and a sharp aura instantly locked onto Su Yi's body. The aura in the surroundings rippled, and there was an invisible tense atmosphere in the small square. It was so dense that it could not be dispersed. More UK New J fastest M up Su Yi stood with his arms crossed, his body not moving an inch. Looking at Hua Dongqiu in front of him, Su Yi knew that things were getting out of hand. Since he couldn't escape and there was no turning back, he might as well let it go. Facing the entire 15th Sword Peak and even the entire Xinjian Gate, Su Yi didn't know how long he would stay in the Xinjian Gate, but this endless stream of trouble had already begun. If he wanted to give himself some peace, he had to be completely deterred. The fact that Ba Yi couldn't stop the people of the 15th Sword Peak from coming this morning proved that the deterrence was far from enough. Moreover, this was the Xinjian Gate, a first-rate force in Zhongzhou. It was just that it was below the sacred mountain. In the divine sword sect, geniuses were as common as clouds. There were countless disciples with outstanding talent. Everyone's age was about the same. Facing the real elites of the Xinjian Gate in front of him, Su Yi's heart was surging with fighting spirit. If he couldn't even deal with the trouble in front of him, how could he face the stronger sacred mountain? Su Yi wanted to prove to himself that what king-tier talent, what royal-tier talent, what large sects, they were nothing in front of him. In front of him was a direct disciple of the Xinjian Gate, and Su Yi wanted to use him as a test. If he fought, it would be a test for him and himself. Su Yi decided to fight. He would treat today's arrogance as a reward for his experience in the barbarian demon forest and the divine sword sect. He wanted to give himself a reward. His body didn't move, but his mind was spinning. Su Yi took a deep breath. His expression was calm as he slowly raised his eyes to look at Hua Dongqiu and said, "Come at me together, so I don't have to waste time dealing with them one by one." There were at least 2,000 spectators gathered around the small square, but it was abnormally quiet. Facing the obviously angry Hua Dongqiu, Su Yi didn't put him in his eyes at all. Everyone looked at Su Yi's posture, thinking that Su Yi might have gone crazy. An outer disciple who didn't put a direct disciple in his eyes. If this wasn't crazy, what else could it be? Staring coldly at Su Yi, the people from the 15th Sword Peak were unable to suppress the anger in their hearts. If not for Hua Dongqiu taking the lead, they would have already attacked him. A dazzling green light shone from within Hua Dongqiu's longsword. Yuan Qi surged into the sword in his hand as he stared coldly at Su Yi. Boom! At this moment, everyone could feel the aura surging from Hua Dongqiu's body, the Yuan Qi in his body surging like a flood. Green light shuttled through his meridians, finally enveloping his entire body and shaking the square. Second-level origin spirit stage. When this aura gushed out from Hua Dongqiu's body without reservation, someone in the square cried out in surprise. This was second-level origin spirit stage. A powerful aura enveloped Hua Dongqiu, the surrounding Yuan Qi energy howling like a small storm. At this moment it was as if once he attacked, he would bring forth a vast and mighty aura, unleashing an incomparably swift and fierce attack. Second-level origin spirit stage. Su Yi looked at the former. He wasn't surprised by this level of cultivation, as he already had an idea in his heart. Let me see if you have the capital to be arrogant in front of the 15th sword peak. I'll give you a chance to attack first, otherwise you won't even have the chance to. Chapter 366. Why don't you make the first move? If I make the first move, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to make your move. At this moment, Su Yi's expression was calm. His black hair and robes fluttered in the wind, but his body remained motionless like a boulder. Too arrogant! He's about to make his move. Will Su Yi be Hua Dongqiu's match? Shocked gazes surged as they stared intently at the arena, afraid that they would miss out on what was going to happen next. The entire arena was silent. Even the extremely ferocious flying barbaric demonic beasts in the air had quietened down. The atmosphere was so tense that it felt like the space was about to explode. Everyone knew that Hua Dongqiu was furious. Once he made his move, it would be a violent and surging attack. He would not show any mercy and would definitely defeat Su Yi in an unstoppable manner. Did that arrogant outer court disciple really have the ability to be arrogant, or was he crazy to not put a direct disciple in his eyes? The result would be clear soon. Ding-dang! Suddenly, a crisp sound rang out. Among the spectators, a disciple secretly trembled, and a piece of trash fell to the ground. This sound tore through the tense atmosphere. Buzz! Wind and thunder rumbled as Hua Dongqiu made his move. He tightly gripped his sword and stamped his foot on the ground. Green wood-type Yuan energy exploded from the soles of his feet. Qi La, the surging Yuan energy formed a powerful force that directly caused Hua Dongqiu's figure to become like a cheetah. His figure seemed to turn into an afterimage as he directly shot towards Su Yi. At the same time, the sword in Hua Dongqiu's hand glowed with a resplendent green light. Before the tip of the sword reached Su Yi, the sword light had already shot out, and in the blink of an eye, it had already reached Su Yi's throat. Swish! The sword light tore through the air. The attack was swift and fierce. After the sword light, the surging aura was like a surging wave, bringing with it the power to topple mountains and overturn seas. Everyone held their breaths as they stared intently. Everyone could not help but suck in a breath of cold air for Su Yi. Only the disciples on the 15th sword peak were even colder. In their eyes, with their senior brother Hua Dongqiu making a move, that brat was most likely going to suffer. Oh no, what should we do? Zhang Qing's expression changed greatly, turning pale. He stood behind Su Yi, and even from afar, he could feel the terrifying aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas surging towards him. Just this remnant aura alone was enough to make his hair stand on end. Under the gazes of the entire crowd, Hua Dongqiu's sword light had already appeared in front of Su Yi's throat like a bolt of lightning. The sword light was extremely sharp and ferocious. His attacks were fierce, and his aura was earth-shattering. Then, everyone held their breaths as their hearts trembled. Before the sword light, the bloody scene of Su Yi's throat being pierced did not appear. Instead, when the sword tip was less than half an inch away from Su Yi's throat, Su Yi's head disappeared like a shadow, as if it was blown away by the wind. At the same time, The treasured sword in Huodongqiu's hand, as if it was frozen, suddenly froze, unable to move even an inch. In the next moment, like a ghost, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Su Yi's figure moved to the side, but his feet did not move at all. His body only slanted to the side, avoiding the lightning-fast sword tip. At the same time, everyone could clearly see a palm covering Huodongqiu's wrist, tightly grasping Huodongqiu's wrist. It was as if it was because of this palm that the treasured sword in Huodongqiu's hand was forcefully suppressed, unable to move an inch. After that sword strike, the mountain-toppling and ocean-overturning momentum quietly disappeared without a trace. Everyone's eyes followed the movement of the palm and suddenly stopped on the sturdy figure of the young man. The young man's black hair moved slightly, his robe flapping in the wind. Instantly, the crowd was in an uproar and everyone was shocked. In that instant, Huodongqiu seemed to have sensed something as his pupils shrank in the depths of his green eyes. But it was too late. Su Yi's chiseled face curled into a cold smile, and a red light poured out of his eyes. Boom! In an instant, a vast and mighty aura spread out from his body. Waves of air were like burning flames, carrying a great sense of majesty. It was like an emperor that could not be provoked, domineering and fierce, majestic and destructive. His eyes were as red as fire, and at this moment Su Yi's chest was filled with the desire to fight. His thin body stood tall and straight, his hair fluttered in the wind, and his robes fluttered in the wind, giving people a feeling of fear for no reason. Sensing the aura right in front of him, Huodongqiu's pupils suddenly constricted, and a look of shock involuntarily gushed out from his face. His heart even trembled, and a sense of unease crawled out from the depths of his soul. But Huodongqiu was not an idiot, and his identity as a direct disciple was not an exaggeration. He represented the absolute strength of the Shunjian Gate. In an instant, Huodongqiu gritted his teeth, shook his left arm, and clenched his fist, releasing a burst of green light, and punched out. But as Huodongqiu's fist punched out, a red light flashed in front of him, and a fist exploded forth. The red light wrapped around the fist carried with it a powerful force, causing the surrounding space to ripple slightly. Boom! At such close proximity, the two fists collided, and a muffled sound like thunder exploded. Bam! The muffled sound was like thunder, and under the impact of the power, the bluestone floor cracked, and countless cracks spread out from Su Yi and Huodongqiu like a spider web. Gotcha! At the same time, under everyone's gaze, Huodongqiu's body flew backwards, and a dark red mist of blood sprayed out from his mouth, and he smashed into the distance like a meteor. Huodongqiu's body slid a few feet on the ground before coming to a stop. Wherever he passed, the cracks on the ground exploded, and continued to spread out. Gravel surged, and dust flew everywhere. When this scene appeared, everyone's eyes surged with shock. Everyone followed the gaze and saw Huodongqiu's body in a sorry state, his hair disheveled, and his mouth dripping with blood. The most shocking thing was that at this moment, Huodongqiu's left fist was covered in blood, and his flesh was lacerated, and even his bones could be seen. A single punch had caused Huodongqiu to be so severely injured. 7q More importantly, when the two fists collided, Huodongqiu's fist, which was at the second level of Origin Spirit Realm, was shattered. What kind of strength was needed to achieve this? Huodongqiu continued to vomit blood, and endured the pain as he struggled to get up. His face was pale, and the pain made his handsome face even more ferocious. Everyone was stunned, and their faces could not help but twitch, and their hearts beat wildly. Chapter 367. U+S They stared at Huodongqiu, who was struggling to get up, his body drenched in blood and the corners of his mouth red, and the fist in his hand that looked like it was about to explode. The surrounding onlookers could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. At this moment, the ones who were the most shocked were the group of inner sect disciples from the 15th Sword Peak. This group of inner sect disciples had originally been full of confidence. However, at this moment, the sneers on the faces of these inner sect disciples from the 15th sword peak had long been replaced by utter shock, the hairs on their bodies standing on end. They had originally wanted to make a move, but at this moment, they could not help but feel their hair stand on end. This was especially so for the stocky inner sect disciple at level 1 essence spirit stage. Seeing Huadongqiu's end, he felt his hair stand on end. Huadongqiu, who was so much stronger than him, had been reduced to such a state with a single move. If he had recklessly made a move earlier, he did not know what would have happened, and would probably end up in an even worse state than Senior Huadongqiu. Injuring Huadongqiu with a single move, such strength did not need to be proven. This was definitely not an arrogant outer sect disciple. He had the qualifications to be arrogant. Zhang Qing's mouth was agape at this moment, and his jaw was about to drop to the ground. Looking at the scene before his eyes, Zhang Qing could not help but rub his eyes hard, thinking that his eyes were playing tricks on him. The flying dust gradually settled, and Su Yi's figure appeared. He was wearing an outer sect disciple's robe, but it could not hide the special aura he exuded. The extraordinary sword in Huadongqiu's hand had unknowingly appeared in Su Yi's hand. Such a precious sword was priceless, and Su Yi did not want to let it go. The crowd stared at the thin man carrying a broken sword on his back, a stark contrast to the miserable Huadongqiu. There were no fools present, and everyone knew that to be able to defeat personal disciple Huadongqiu with a single move, this person's strength far surpassed Huadongqiu's. On the other hand, Huadongqiu was already at the second level of the origin spirit stage. Yet, he had been heavily injured by Su Yi in a single move, leaving him in such a miserable state. Since Su Yi was able to far surpass Huadongqiu, then Su Yi's cultivation naturally surpassed the origin spirit stage. Even at the most conservative estimate, Su Yi's cultivation was likely at the third level of the essence spirit stage. Otherwise, how could he possibly possess the strength to severely injure Huadongqiu in a single blow? When they thought up to here, many people instantly gasped while their hearts trembled fiercely. When they looked at Su Yi once more, their gazes were filled with shock. Huadongqiu was already over 20 years old, but he was only at the second level of the origin spirit stage. In the entire Shenzhen Gate, he was already an outstanding existence, and his status as a personal disciple went without saying. Looking at Su Yi's age, he seemed to be around 15 or 16 years old, but he was already at the third level of the origin spirit realm. Such a comparison caused the hearts of the crowd to involuntarily tremble in shock for no reason. With this level of cultivation and talent, even in the entire Divine Sword sect, he would be an existence comparable to a monster. So strong. Low in the sky, atop a flying barbaric beast, several fierce and dignified youths were similarly overwhelmed with shock. Their jaws were so shocked that they could not retract them, while their faces were filled with astonishment. So handsome! There was no lack of female disciples in the square. At this moment, ripples surfaced on their shocked faces as they looked at the tenacious and tall skinny youth. In the square, the inner and outer sect disciples who had just been taught a lesson by Su Yi in the training hall were still filled with resentment. However, they had now personally witnessed their personal disciple Huadongqiu, who was at the second level of the origin spirit stage, being easily defeated by Su Yi in a single blow, causing the resentment in their hearts to turn into complete and utter fear. At this moment, ripples appeared in Su Yi's eyes for an instant. In the previous attack, Su Yi had not used any of his trump cards, nor had he used the full strength of the third level of the origin spirit stage. He had only used the full strength of the second level of the origin spirit stage. Su Yi wanted to see what the outcome would be if he were to compare his current cultivation with the elites of the same generation in the Divine Sword sect. And Su Yi was very satisfied with the current outcome. Su Yi knew that all of this originated from the Origin Supreme technique, from himself, and from the tempering he had undergone along the way. Huff, Sui took a deep breath, but there wasn't much joy. Defeating Huadongqiu was not something to be too happy about. Although Huadongqiu was an elite among his peers in the Xinjian Gate, he was not one of the top existences in the Xinjian Gate. Moreover, the sacred mountain was stronger than the Xinjian Gate. If Sui wanted to step onto the sacred mountain, he did not only need to defeat his peers in the sacred mountain. What Sui needed was absolute strength, not victory or defeat with his peers. Then, amidst the crowd's shock, Suyi's gaze fell on the group of inner disciples from the 15th Sword Peak. His gaze swept across them slowly, and with a cold voice, he said, "Hand over all of your space bags. I'll keep them for you." Everyone was stunned by Suyi's words. The group of youths from the 15th Sword Peak were even more stunned. They were stunned for a while before they looked at each other with ashen faces. "Don't you dare cross the line." Finally, the inner disciples understood that Sui wanted to snatch their space bags, and wanted them to hand them over themselves. After all, Bai and the others had already been robbed clean. If it was any other time, they would probably laugh their heads off if an outer disciple asked them to snatch their space bags in broad daylight. They would definitely teach him a lesson. However, at this moment, none of the inner disciples from the 15th Sword Peak laughed. Instead, their faces were extremely solemn. "If that's the case, I'll have to take it myself." Sui did not waste any time. As soon as he finished speaking, vitality gushed out from the soles of his feet. His figure was like a ghost as he pounced towards the nearest person. "Watch out!" The three youths at LV1 Origin Spirit Stage had a drastic change in their expressions as they hurriedly shouted. Bang! However, it was too late. Suyi's fist had already landed on the nearest inner disciple's chest. With a loud bang, the latter immediately spat out blood as he wailed in pain. "This is too much. Everyone, attack together. A warrior prefers death to humiliation. Attack together." In just a short moment, the inner disciples from the 15th Sword Peak were not pushovers. They immediately reacted. A warrior prefers death to humiliation. These disciples from the 15th Sword Peak were young and vigorous. They could not bear such humiliation. Swoosh, swoosh, in an instant, streaks of sword light intertwined. Streaks of aura soared into the sky and gathered. The momentum shook the entire square. All the disciples from the 15th Sword Peak joined forces. Streaks of sword light swept out, cutting through the air. Vitality condensed outwards. Some people condensed vitality to protect themselves. Chapter 368. Boom! In an instant, Suyi's figure was like a ghost. Crimson light exploded from his body, and his hair flew backward. Bang, 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 bang. A series of muffled explosions could be heard as someone was sent flying backward while vomiting blood. How could these inner disciples from the 15th Sword Peak be a match for Sui? Although they were powerful when they joined forces, their combined attacks were difficult to deal with and their power multiplied. However, ever since Sui started his cultivation, he had always been in the Barbaric Demon Forest and Barbaric Demon Forest. Every time, he was honed in actual combat, tempering himself in blood and fire. What kind of battle had he not seen before? These inner disciples from the Xinjian Gate were extraordinary, but how could they be a match for Sui? Furthermore, these inner disciples from the 15th Sword Peak were not even comparable to Sui in terms of cultivation level, let alone Sui. Figures were sent flying backward while vomiting blood, accompanied by wails of agony. Clank, treasured swords fell one after another. Rays of light shot out from the square as energy exploded. Three youths at the first level of Essence Spirit Realm condensed their Yuan Qi into the shape of beasts at the soles of their feet. One of them was a flying barbaric demon beast, while the other was a tiger and a leopard. They looked like living creatures with terrifying auras. Z1 shot B bang bang bang. Su-yi exploded with power. His fists smashed the two beast-like phantoms into pieces. Borrowing the momentum, he leaped into the air and struck out with his palm at lightning speed, shattering the phantoms of the flying beast-like phantoms. The young man fell from the sky and crashed heavily onto the ground. In just a few moments, all the disciples from the 15th Sword Peak were lying on the ground in a mess, wailing in agony. These inner disciples were all in a sorry state, and their eyes were filled with horror. Su-yi stepped forward and took out the space bags from the disciples. Everything was done in a very natural manner, as if he was familiar with the process. Hwodongchyo struggled several times before he could get up. He did not have the strength to intervene at all. In the end, Hwodongchyo did not manage to escape. A personal disciple's interspatial bag was probably much richer than an inner disciple's interspatial bag. How could Su-yi let it go? As Hwodongchyo screamed in agony, Su-yi took the interspatial bag from his chest. The treasured swords that fell to the ground were also put into Su-yi's interspatial bag openly. All of this happened under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Everyone was dumbfounded. Was this really an outer sect disciple? How could he defeat Hwodongchyo in a single move? As for the outer sect disciples, they were more like bandit. How dare you? You were too arrogant in front of the training hall. Finally, a flying barbaric demon beast that was hovering in midair spread its wings and flew over. There were several young men with fierce and dignified expressions on their faces. Only then did they come back to their senses. Their faces were filled with astonishment. The leader of the group was a yellow-robed young man with a tall and straight figure. He had an extraordinary temperament and a dashing appearance. As he looked down at Su-yi, his eyes twitched fiercely. The disciplinary hall. Zhang Qing's eyes trembled as she exclaimed at Su-yi. She never expected that the disciplinary hall's disciples would come. The disciplinary hall's disciples were people that even personal disciples wouldn't dare to provoke under normal circumstances. Once someone broke the sect's rules and fell into the hands of the disciplinary hall's disciples, it was no laughing matter. Su-yi raised his eyes and looked at the gigantic flying barbaric demon beast. It was a demon spirit realm Gale Golden Eagle, and its bloodline wasn't low either. Disciplinary Hall, second-level origin spirit realm. Looking at the several young men on the Gale Golden Eagle's back, every single one of them had a fierce aura and they were all at first-level origin spirit realm. Su-yi felt that the yellow-robed young man leading the group was similar to Hwodongchyo. He should also be at second-level origin spirit realm. "Do you need something from me?" Facing the group of young men, Su-yi said indifferently. "I don't care which sword peak you're from. You won't be able to escape punishment for making a move in the training hall. You're still so arrogant in the training hall and snatching a fellow disciple. That's a serious crime," Huang Zhongyu said with a stern expression. But at this moment, Huang Zhongyu's heart was trembling. An outer sect disciple like this was too terrifying. Hwodongchyo's fate was still in front of him, and he probably wouldn't be able to deal with him. If it wasn't for his status as a disciplinary hall's disciple, Huang Zhongyu wouldn't have dared to provoke this youth. But he was a disciplinary hall's disciple and the leader of a small group, so Huang Zhongyu wasn't afraid. In the entire Shenzhen Gate, whoever dared to provoke the disciplinary hall and resist the pursuit of the disciplinary hall would be punished even more severely. "You guys have been here for a long time. When others made a move, you guys turned a blind eye. But when I made a move, you guys popped up. Are you guys purposely targeting me?" Su-yi looked at Huang Zhongyu. He had already noticed these people from afar. As a disciplinary hall's disciple, no disciple in the entire Shenzhen Gate would dare to provoke him. But Su-yi was different. He had already gotten himself into trouble in the Shenzhen Gate. Now that he had gotten himself into trouble, there was no need for him to be afraid of this mysterious disciplinary hall. It was also because of this that Sui had no qualms about robbing Huadongqiu and the others of their space bags and treasured swords. Since he had already taken a lot, he might as well take more. Hearing Suyi's words, the fierce youths on the Gale Golden Eagle's back twitched their eyes. Huang Zhongyu's expression didn't change, and he was at a loss for words. At first, he did it because of Huadongqiu. Huadongqiu wasn't someone to be trifled with, so Huang Zhongyu purposely stalled for time. But he didn't expect the outcome to be like this. No matter who it is, no one is allowed to fight in the training hall. So, come with me to the disciplinary hall. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Huang Zhongyu's expression darkened. Since he had already stepped in, he naturally had to bring them back. Otherwise, the disciplinary hall's reputation would be tarnished because of him. Get the hell down here! However, just as Huang Zhongyu finished speaking, a loud roar came out from Suyi's mouth. It was mixed with a majestic and destructive aura, and immediately swept out. His eyes were scarlet red as he stared at the Gale Golden Eagle. Screech! The Gale Golden Eagle screeched, and its huge body immediately trembled. Its sharp and fierce eyes surged with fear as it directly fell from the sky. There were still many flying brute demon beasts above the square. At this moment they were all greatly affected. They trembled in shock and fell from the sky. Bang, bang, several youths staggered down from the Gale Golden Eagle. Their primordial chi surged out of their bodies, and a primordial chi barrier protected their bodies. However, when they smashed onto the ground, they were still in a miserable state. There were also a few youths who seemed to be much more experienced. In their panic, they condensed their primordial chi into a beast shadow and borrowed the force to land. However, they also seemed to be in a sorry state. I don't care if you're from the 15th Sword Peak or the Disciplinary Hall. Whoever dares to provoke me, don't blame me for being impolite. Suyi's eyes were cold as he walked forward, causing Huang Zhongyu and the other disciples of the Disciplinary Hall to retreat. Huadongqiu and the others had more people than them. Huadongqiu's strength was also there, but the result was so miserable. Chapter 369. What do you want to do? We are disciples of the Disciplinary Hall. Seeing Sui coming forward, several youths of the Disciplinary Hall, who were originally dignified and fierce, could not help but take a step back subconsciously. The disciples of the Disciplinary Hall twitched their eyes. Perhaps they had never thought that there would be a day when the disciples of the Disciplinary Hall would be afraid of an outer sect disciple and not dare to take action. But these disciples of the Disciplinary Hall also knew that the outer sect disciple in front of them was definitely not simple and was too arrogant. This outer sect disciple was so rude to Huadongqiu and the others. They were afraid that the outer sect disciple would not have much consideration for their status as disciples of the Disciplinary Hall and would not be polite either. Sui did not even look at these disciples of the Disciplinary Hall who retreated in fear. Sui did not pay any attention to these Disciplinary Hall disciples. He walked past several Disciplinary Hall disciples, yuan qi gushing out from the soles of his feet, and with a leap, he landed on the Gale Golden Eagle that the Disciplinary Hall disciples had just ridden. The creeping Gale Golden Eagle, following Suyi's jump, became even more submissive and respectful, as if it wanted to worship him. Such a scene caused the gazes of the few Discipline Hall disciples to change greatly. The Gale Golden Eagle was arrogant and unruly. Although it had been tamed by the Xinjian Gate, even they had spent a long time with the Gale Golden Eagle and fed it for a long time before the Gale Golden Eagle agreed to let them ride it. But the outer sect disciple in front of them had directly mounted the Gale Golden Eagle and made it so submissive and respectful, as if it had directly recognized him as its master. Zhang Qing, are you still not leaving? On the Gale Golden Eagle, Sui looked at Zhang Qing, who was still dumbfounded. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, all eyes immediately fell on Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing came back to his senses and felt the gazes of the people around him. In the 2 years since he had joined the Shenzhen Gate, he had never been treated like this. At this moment, although Zhang Qing's heart was broken, he had to admit that the feeling of being the center of attention was very good. Unconsciously, his body straightened a little, and he immediately passed through the crowd and mounted the Gale Golden Eagle. Go! On the back of the Gale Golden Eagle, Su Yi stood with his hands behind his back. His figure was straight, and the soles of his feet gently touched the feathers of the Gale Golden Eagle. As the Gale Golden Eagle screeched, its entire body was covered in golden light. It spread its wings and soared into the sky, accompanied by the howling wind. It was an extreme performance. Looking at the Gale Golden Eagle, the few disciplinary hall disciples were even more dumbfounded. Could it be that the Gale Golden Eagle was raised by the outer court disciple since it was young? Otherwise, how could it run away with someone else so easily and behave like this? The entire square was still silent for a long time. Huff huff, after a long time, the sound of gasps resounded throughout the entire area. There were even people who swallowed their saliva, and their faces were filled with shock that didn't disperse for a long time. Since when did the 36th Sword Peak have such a terrifying outer disciple? Gazing at the figure of the young man on the back of the Gale Golden Eagle that soared into the clouds, some people's eyes flickered. I'm afraid there's going to be a big show to watch. The disciplinary hall won't let this go, right? The 15th Sword Peak suffered a great loss, and I'm afraid they won't let it go. Immediately, some people discussed in low voices. Today's matter had caused the disciplinary hall to suffer a loss, and the people of the 15th Sword Peak to lose even more face. Perhaps they wouldn't let this matter go. On the 36th Sword Peak, an outer sect disciple had challenged the 15th Sword Peak by himself and defeated the personal disciple, Huodongqiu, in a single move. This news shocked the disciplinary hall disciples, and soon, the news spread like wildfire. If yesterday's news of an outer court disciple defeating the inner court disciple Ba-e of the 15th Sword Peak was already causing waves, then today's news was undoubtedly no different from setting off stormy waves wherever it passed. Therefore, those who heard the news were all flabbergasted, and couldn't believe it. However, in the square of the training hall, there were too many people who had witnessed it with their own eyes. The vivid and exaggerated news spread everywhere, and there was no room for doubt. Is he that strong? How is that possible? On one of the sword peaks, a youth who was dressed in a neat robe, who was a direct disciple, had a doubtful look in his eyes. Huodongqiu is already at the second level of the origin spirit stage. How strong can an outer court disciple be? I'm afraid there's more to it than meets the eye. On one of the sword peaks, a group of direct disciples were also discussing, each of them with dazzling eyes and extraordinary temperaments. Us outer court disciples have finally made a name for ourselves. Even a direct disciple can be defeated. On the various sword peaks, groups of outer court disciples were gathered together, and all of them were discussing the news that had spread. At dusk, the sun was setting in the western horizon, and the afterglow of the setting sun flickered in the distance. The towering peaks that reached into the clouds were gradually shrouded by the darkness. Let's go back. On the 36th Sword Peak, Su Yi dismounted from the Gale Golden Eagle, and said with a wave of his sleeves, "You're finally back." Chapter 8, Section QT, Eon *60. Dozens of figures hurried up, as if they had been waiting for a long time. Their pale faces were filled with urgency and solemnity. They were Su Jiahui and the other outer court disciples. "Miss Jiahui, what happened? Did someone come to cause trouble again?" Su Yi's expression changed slightly, and his brows furrowed slightly. Hearing Su Yi's words, the group of outer court disciples felt helpless, and could not help but smile bitterly. However, there was also a sense of relief in their bitter smiles. They were originally recuperating, but the commotion at the foot of the mountain today was just too big, and it alarmed them. After they went down the mountain, they discovered everything at the foot of the mountain. So many inner court disciples of the 15th Sword Peak were stripped naked and tied up at the foot of the mountain. Ba-yi, who had a little reputation in the entire Shenzhen Gate, was also among them. When they saw the scene and found out that it was done by Su-yi, they were so shocked that they almost collapsed. Who would dare to go up the 36th Sword Peak? You're the one who got into big trouble, Su Jiahui said. Now, no one dared to go up the 36th Sword Peak casually. The lesson of Ba-yi and the others was enough to deter too many people. This kind of intimidation was not only because of their strength, but also because of the consequences of their defeat. No one wanted to be stripped naked and tied up at the foot of the mountain. In the future, they would not be able to raise their heads in the divine sword sect. Hearing this, Su-yi breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that someone else had gone up the 36th Sword Peak. You've caused too much trouble. Today, senior brother Huadongqiu from the 15th Sword Peak also came, and he seemed very angry. He is a pro-disciple, and I'm afraid he won't let you go. Su Jiahui's eyes darted around as she pondered. She was worried. Today, she saw senior brother Huadongqiu and the others go to the 36th Sword Peak and take Ba-yi and the others away. Chapter 370. Su Jiahui could not help but worry as the identity of a personal disciple was too powerful and also proved his absolute strength. This, then senior brother Huadongqiu, hearing Su Jiahui's words and seeing her worried face, Zhang Qing could no longer hold it in. Zhang Qing, what's wrong? Su Jiahui asked. Senior brother Huadongqiu has also been defeated by brother Su-yi. Zhang Qing had no choice but to roughly explain what had happened in the sparring hall. Defeating Huadongqiu and all the inner disciples of the 15th Sword Peak, ignoring the disciplinary hall, and even taking away all of Huadongqiu's spatial bags and treasured swords, hearing the news from Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui and the rest were dumbfounded, their jaws dropping in shock. Su-yi, is this true? Su Jiahui's eyes were filled with astonishment as she stared at Su-yi and asked. She wanted to confirm it. They were the ones who provoked me first. I only took action to teach them a lesson. Su-yi shrugged, indicating that he had admitted it. Oh no, this is going to be a huge problem. Hearing Su-yi's admission, Su Jiahui was so frightened that her feet trembled. Huff! Huff! The outer disciples sucked in a breath of cold air as they stared at Su-yi as if they had seen a ghost. Others might not understand, but they knew best that this was a youth who had been rescued by Elder Su and was an outsider. Huadongqiu was a personal disciple of the Shenzhen Gate and had already reached the astonishing cultivation level of the second-level origin spirit stage. His talent was extraordinary, and among his peers in the entire Shenzhen Gate, he was extremely famous. Just what kind of background did this outsider youth have to actually defeat Huadongqiu in one move? How could Su Jiahui and the rest of the outer disciples not be shocked at this moment? I have to think of a way, or else I'll be in big trouble. At the very least, I have to wait until Elder Su returns. Su Jiahui was very anxious. She didn't want anything to happen to Su-yi. Moreover, before Elder Su left, he had entrusted this Su-yi to her. If something were to happen, she wouldn't be able to explain it to Elder Su. It's fine. They can't do anything to me. Su-yi smiled and looked at Su Jiahui and the other outer sect disciples. He could see that they were not worried about the trouble they would cause, but they were really worried about themselves. Let alone the 15th Sword Peak, the disciplinary hall will definitely not give up. They will definitely send even stronger disciplinary hall disciples. Su Jiahui rolled her eyes at Su-yi. He even dared to ignore a disciple of the disciplinary hall. This guy's guts were too big. In the entire Shenzhen Gate, she had never heard of anyone who dared to ignore the torture court, let alone someone who could escape from the torture court's pursuit. A disciple of the torture court is just so. Su-yi raised his eyebrows. The cultivation of those few torture court disciples was just so. Of course, Su-yi was very clear that from the looks of the few discipline hall disciples that he had met, all of them had already stepped into the origin spirit stage despite their young ages. Such a cultivation level represented talent. If placed in the outside world, any one of them would absolutely be an extraordinary figure. Su-yi wasn't looking down on the torture court. The dignified torture court disciples of the Xinjiang Gate naturally wouldn't just be those few disciples. There would definitely be even stronger disciples. On the contrary, Su-yi even had some inexplicable expectations. If he could fight with the strongest of his generation in the Xinjiang Gate, it would also be a kind of validation for himself. As for the huge trouble he had caused, Su-yi no longer thought about it since things had already progressed to this stage. Su-yi only hoped that what the mysterious beautiful woman said would be useful. When the time came, they could use Elder Su's disciples as a countermeasure. As for what would happen to Elder Su in the end, it was unknown. Don't look down on the torture court. Furthermore, the torture court will definitely not let this matter rest. Su Jiahui rolled her eyes at Su-yi once again. Her eyebrows slightly creased as she muttered, "Perhaps the people from the torture court have already arrived. We have to immediately send you to a safe place, at least until Elder Su returns. But we don't know when Elder Su will return, it's fine." Su-yi smiled bitterly. Su Jiahui indeed had some of Wan Er's shadow on her. Thinking of Wan Er, a trace of light flashed across Su-yi's eyes without leaving a trace. He wondered how that girl was doing in the Su family. "I've got it. I have an idea." Suddenly, Su Jiahui's eyes flickered. Her eyes were bright as she looked at Su-yi and revealed a trace of a smile. "What idea?" Zhang Qing asked curiously. "The Myriad Sword Conference is in 5 days. Su Jiahui's eyes lit up as she said to everyone, before Elder Su left, "He asked me to represent the 36th peak to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. However, my injuries are very serious now. It's impossible for me to recover in a few days. Even if I recover, I'm afraid I won't be of much use in the Myriad Sword Conference. I won't even be able to pass the first round." Her voice paused for a moment. A trace of disappointment flashed across Su Jiahui's delicate face. She bit her lips slightly and was dejected. The Myriad Sword Conference. Hearing the Myriad Sword Conference, the expressions of Zhang Qing and the rest changed slightly. They were secretly dejected. "What's the Myriad Sword Conference?" Looking at everyone's expressions, Su-yi asked curiously. Then, from Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the rest, Su-yi found out that in 5 days, Xinjiang Gate would usher in a grand event that was held once every 5 years. It was the Myriad Sword Conference. There were 72 sword peaks in Xinjiang Gate. Among them, 36 sword peaks were occupied by outer disciples, inner disciples, and lineal disciples. Every Myriad Sword Conference was held for the younger generation of disciples. All the disciples of the same generation on the 36 sword peaks were allowed to participate. All the disciples on the 36 sword peaks added up to more than 10,000 people. It should be known that apart from the 36th sword peak, the total number of inner and outer disciples on each sword peak ranged from a few thousand to a few hundred. As for the lineal disciples on each sword peak, there were not many of them. In addition, the disciples on the 36 sword peaks, as well as the odd job disciples and registered disciples, were also allowed to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. It could be said that the Myriad Sword Conference had more than 10,000 participants. All the disciples would participate in a grand competition. It was the most lively grand event in the entire Xinjiang Gate. It was also the verification of the younger generation of disciples by Xinjiang Gate. In the Myriad Sword Conference, it was said that those who could obtain the highest ranking in the end would be able to obtain unparalleled benefits and a large amount of rewards from Xinjiang Gate. Unparalleled benefits and a large amount of rewards. Hearing this, Su Yi's eyes lit up. Unparalleled benefits and a large amount of rewards from Xinjian Gate. Just thinking about it made him excited. I don't have the strength to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. Even if I went, I would only embarrass the 36th Sword Peak. Chapter 371. Whichever Sword Peak's disciple had the most outstanding performance would naturally be in the limelight. The elders of the Sword Peak would also have a louder voice in the sect. If you don't participate, then who else can? Someone from the 36 Sword Peaks must participate. Plus, before Elder Su left, he asked you to represent the 36 Sword Peak. Zhang Qing's expression was dejected. Su Jiahui was the strongest among them. If Su Jiahui couldn't participate and was afraid of embarrassing the 36th peak, then no one else could. Yes, Su Jiahui looked at Su Yi and gritted her teeth. Let Su Yi represent the 36th peak in the Myriad Sword Conference. What? Hearing this, the outer disciples were shocked. But Su Yi isn't a disciple of the Xinjian Gate. How can he participate in the Deity Sword Conference? Zhang Qing shook her head. If he wasn't a disciple of the Xinjian Gate, then he couldn't participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. There's no other choice. When the time comes, we'll just say that Elder Su asked Su Yi to represent the 36th peak in the Myriad Sword Conference. Su Jiahui gritted her teeth and said with a determined gaze, after causing so much trouble, the disciplinary hall won't let it go. The people of the 15th peak won't let it go either. If we say that Elder Su wants Su Yi to represent the 36th peak in the Myriad Sword Conference, then I'm afraid they won't dare to do anything. Brother Su Yi isn't a disciple of the Xinjian Gate. I'm afraid that he won't be able to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference just because he wants to. Zhang Qing was still worried. Just say what Elder Su said. When the time comes, we'll bring Brother Su Yi to register and receive the Xinjian Gate badge. There shouldn't be a big problem. Those deacons won't dare to offend Elder Su. Su Jiahui seemed to have already considered this problem. As long as he registered and obtained the badge, he would be able to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. A 6D hashtag. Although it was against the rules for Su Yi to register, it was not the day for Xinjian Gate to recruit new disciples. However, the people brought back by Elder Su had mentioned Elder Su's name. The deacons in charge of this matter shouldn't dare to offend Elder Su, so there shouldn't be too big of a problem. You want me to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference? Su Yi was surprised. Yes, I'm afraid we don't have the strength to participate. We'll only embarrass the 36th Sword Peak. Su Jiahui smiled bitterly. She had also heard that in the previous Myriad Sword Conferences, the 36th Sword Peak did not have a good ranking. However, this time, Elder Su had handed it to her. Naturally, he hoped that she would be able to get a good ranking. Su Jiahui knew that she was unable to participate. Perhaps Su Yi would be able to get a good ranking for the 36th Sword Peak. After all, senior brother Hua Dongqiu was defeated by him. The Myriad Sword Conference. Su Yi's eyes turned and his index finger touched his chin. The entire younger generation of Xinjian Gate would participate, including the personal disciples. Most importantly, there were unimaginable benefits and huge reward. Su Yi couldn't help but be tempted by this. You will represent the 36th Sword Peak to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. Can you do me a favor? Su Jiahui looked at Su Yi, as if she was afraid that Su Yi wouldn't accept her kindness. In Su Jiahui's heart, she truly hoped that Su Yi could represent her in the Myriad Sword Conference. She knew that even if she went, she wouldn't be able to pass the first round. I won't cause you any trouble, right? Su Yi asked. No, we probably won't be able to pass the first round either. Zhang Qing smiled bitterly and said, anyway, everyone can go. However, there will be a representative on each Sword Peak. When the time comes, you will lead the 36th Sword Peak. We will definitely get a good ranking. I see. Su Yi was tempted. After all, he had already caused a lot of trouble in Xinjian Gate. Elder Su hadn't returned yet. He could indeed participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. Firstly, he could compete with the younger generation of Xinjian Gate and prove himself. He would also have the opportunity to obtain unparalleled benefits and large amounts of rewards, so why not? There are still 5 days to the Myriad Sword Conference. What should we do in these 5 days? Zhang Qing asked Su Jiahui. There were still a few days to the Myriad Sword Conference. However, it was hard to guarantee that someone from the 15th Sword Peak would come looking for trouble in these few days. Moreover, the torture court wouldn't let this matter go. Go to the Divine Sword Cliff and cultivate in seclusion for 5 days. Su Jiahui said confidently. She had already thought of a solution. She said, as long as we are in the Divine Sword Cliff, no one will be able to go in and cause trouble. Then, Su Yi learned that the Divine Sword Cliff was where the disciples of Xinjian Gate cultivated in seclusion. There were hundreds and thousands of caves on the Divine Sword Cliff. They were called sword caves. In each sword cave, there were cultivation experiences or sword moves left behind by the experts of Xinjian Gate since ancient times. If one could comprehend in seclusion, they would benefit a lot from it. However, if one wanted to cultivate in seclusion on the Divine Sword Cliff, they would have to pay points as the price. It wasn't easy to go there. In these sword caves, the stronger the experts of Xinjian Gate were, the more points one would need to pay to enter. The Divine Sword Cliff is a separate place. It is said that the experts of the gate have set it up. As long as you enter the sword cave, no one will be able to go in and cause trouble unless you come out yourself. Su Jiahui told Su Yi about the situation on the Divine Sword Cliff. As long as he went up the Divine Sword Cliff and entered the sword cave, no one would be able to cause trouble for Su Yi before the Myriad Sword Conference. After the Myriad Sword Conference, once Su Yi represented the 36th Sword Peak to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference, the legal division wouldn't be able to do anything. When the Myriad Sword Conference ended, Elder Su would probably be back. This method is indeed feasible. However, Brother Su Yi doesn't have any points to go up the Divine Sword Cliff, Zhang Qing said. Su Jiahui's eyes were clear. She took out a baby-sized badge that looked like a jade pendant. It was round and had a simple color. There was a sword pattern engraved on it, and it emitted a radiant light. Take my badge. There are some points in it. I have saved them for a period of time. It should be enough for me to stay in the sword cave below the Divine Sword Cliff for 5 days. Su Jiahui stuffed the badge into Su Yi's hand. A faint blush appeared on her pale cheek. It was difficult to notice in the sunset that shone on the mountain peak. I can't take it. Su Yi was stunned. He then shook his head. Su Yi heard that in the Xinjian Gate, points were needed regardless of whether it was martial skills or cultivation resources. Some points were also needed to cultivate in seclusion at the Divine Sword Cliff. With Su Jiahui and Zhang Qing's situation, Su Yi knew that Su Jiahui must have saved up these points for a long time. How could he take her points? Chapter 372. Su Jiahui said. If he could really get a good name, Elder Su would not have given him such an important task in vain. Perhaps Elder Su would forgive her for making the decision on her own when he saw that Su Yi could get a seat on the 36th Sword Peak. If you can get a good ranking in the end, you will get a lot of rewards, including points. The higher your ranking, the more rewards you will get. Zhang Qing's eyes were full of yearning. Those who were stronger would get more resources. In the eyes of outsiders, they were already extraordinary disciples of Xinjian Gate. Especially in their small hometown, being a disciple of Xinjian Gate was something that brought honor to their ancestors. Zhang Qing still remembered the fervent gazes of the entire village when he obtained the qualification to enter Xinjian Gate and become a disciple of Xinjian Gate. The tears and anticipation of his parents were still vivid in his mind. Zhang Qing, bring Su-yi to Divine Sword Cliff now. The sooner the better. Su Jiahui said to Zhang Qing. She was afraid that the disciples of the torture chamber had already arrived. She hoped that Su-yi would go to Divine Sword Cliff as soon as possible. Su-yi hesitated for a moment before keeping the badge. He would go to Divine Sword Cliff and cultivate in seclusion for a few days. He would also be able to see what the experts of Xinjian Gate had left behind. I will definitely get first place in the Myriad Sword Conference. I will return you 100 times the points, Su-yi said as he looked at Su Jiahui. It's not easy to get first place. All the personal disciples will be participating. Su Jiahui smiled. She knew that Su-yi was very strong, mysterious, and unfathomable. However, Su Jiahui found it hard to believe that Su-yi wanted to get first place in the Myriad Sword Conference. All the personal disciples would be participating in the Myriad Sword Conference, including the monstrous senior brothers and sisters in the Mountain Gate. How powerful would that be? For you, I will definitely take first place in the Myriad Sword Conference. Su-yi smiled at Su Jiahui and left with Zhang Qing. Obtaining first place in the Myriad Sword Gathering, Su-yi really did have this intention. It wasn't just for the supreme benefits and large amounts of rewards. More importantly, if they couldn't even win the Myriad Sword Conference, then how could they step foot onto the hallowed mountain in the future? Gigi, my lord, I will send you to the Divine Sword Cliff. Not far away, a gale golden eagle screeched. Su-yi could understand the beast language. The gale golden eagle had not left and had been waiting nearby. All right. Su-yi nodded. It was much more convenient to travel with the gale golden eagle. Then, Su-yi and Zhang Qing jumped on the gale golden eagles and left in the last light of the sunset. They disappeared in the direction of the Divine Sword Cliff. First place. Who the hell is this guy? Su Jiahui stared at the disappearing figure for a long time before a faint smile appeared on her lips. Coo! Most amazing new chapter T Festival Plus, roar! Suddenly, several huge flying demonic beasts flapped their wings in the distant sky, causing the wind to howl and cover the sunset. The roars of the demonic beasts rang out. Not good. They're from the torture hall. On the 36th Sword Peak, the expressions of the outer sect disciples changed. That was the mount of the torture chamber. So, the torture chamber disciples had come. There were several huge flying demonic beasts with powerful auras. The first one was a flying barbaric demon beast. It had a ferocious head like a lizard and a body like a wolf or a tiger. It had a pair of fleshy wings, and its entire body was suffused with a faint black light. This was an exotic beast, but its aura was very powerful. There were several young men standing upright on the back of the exotic beast. Their robes fluttered in the wind and they looked fierce. The first young man was in his 20s. He wore a tight black battle suit that accentuated his muscular and well-proportioned body. He wore a gray cloak and his facial features were sharp and his expression was cold. Get off the mount. We're going up the mountain. When the flying barbaric demon beast approached the 36th peak, the young man in the black battle suit spoke. 11th senior brother, why don't we go up and capture Su-yi? A fat young man behind the young man in the black battle suit spoke. This is the 36th Sword Peak, Elder Su's territory. Aren't you afraid that Elder Su will destroy you? The young man in the black battle suit said calmly. When Elder Su was mentioned, the young men's faces darkened. It was disrespectful to ride up the 36th Sword Peak directly. They had heard about Elder Su's temper. At dusk, the sunset glow was thick and heavy, covering the sky and the earth. The sky was covered in dark red clouds that illuminated the mountains. Following the curtain of night, the entire sky gradually settled down like sand floating in the turbid current. The courtyard and pavilion were elegantly decorated. Smoke rose from an incense burner and a faint fragrance filled the air. A tall middle-aged man looked at the sunset outside the window. This middle-aged man was probably over 7 feet tall and had a robust physique. He wore a black robe embroidered with golden silk patterns, and his long black hair was neatly combed into a bun on top of his head. His pair of deep eyes flickered with light, and he unconsciously revealed a natural domineering aura of a superior, causing others to unconsciously feel pressured and submit to him with a single glance. At the age of 15 or 16, he defeated Huadongqiu, who was at the second level of Origin Spirit stage, with a single move. The middle-aged man looked at the afterglow of the setting sun outside the window with a faint smile on his face. However, there was also a hint of surprise on his face. "I've already asked. It's the truth. Many disciples on the 15th Sword Peak were severely injured." A gray-robed old man, who looked to be in his 50s but was not yet in his 60s, faced the middle-aged man with a respectful but natural expression. The gray-robed old man's surprised face carried a bitter smile as he continued, "Those inner disciples on the 15th Sword Peak were in trouble. They were stripped naked and displayed in public at the foot of the 36th Sword Peak. It's said that the kid is called Sui. He did not show much mercy. Those who fell into his hands had their space bags snatched away." "Ha ha ha ha," the middle-aged man laughed when he heard this and said, "Interesting. This kid is quite bold." The gray-robed old man felt helpless and smiled bitterly. He then frowned and said, "I've already checked. There doesn't seem to be a disciple called Su-yi in the Xinjiang Gate. Elder Su is also not in the gate these days. Ryugan River, Gongqi, Yunling Feng and the rest were also 15 or 16 years old when they entered the Xinjiang Gate, right?" the middle-aged man asked as if he did not hear the gray-robed old man's words. The gray-robed old man raised his eyebrows and replied, "That's right. They entered the Xinjiang Gate 5 years ago. They were also 15 or 16 years old back then." The middle-aged man smiled and asked, "When they entered the Xinjiang Gate, what was their cultivation base?" "It seems that they were barely close to the Origin Profound stage." Chapter 373. How could the gray-robed elder not understand? Ryugan River, Yunling Feng, and Gongqi were the representatives of the younger generation. They were known as abnormal monsters in the sect. Each of them had extraordinary talent and their progress in cultivation was amazing. However, Ryugan River and the others were only 15 or 16 years old 5 years ago. Their cultivation was only close to the Yuan Xian realm. P9 Original Version L/C Unspecified Currency. As for the outer sect disciple called Sui, it was said that he was only 15 or 16 years old. However, he was already at the Yuan spirit realm. Such a comparison immediately shocked the gray-robed elder. He felt a chill run down his spine and could not help but shudder. The tall middle-aged man smiled and said to the elder, "We don't have to worry about it for now. Let's just pretend that we don't know. However, I'm afraid that someone will definitely make a move after hearing the news about such an outer sect disciple." The gray-robed elder's eyes flickered. That was only an outer sect disciple. Elder Su was not on the 36th Sword Peak. He was afraid that someone would not be able to sit still after hearing the news and would make a move. No matter who makes a move, they will be at the Xinjiang Gate. The middle-aged man smiled. However, there was a flash of slyness in his eyes that was not noticed by the gray-robed elder. "Senior brother, Su-yi has gone to the Divine Sword Cliff." On the 36th Sword Peak, Su Jiahui spoke to a young man in a black battlesuit. She could not help but tremble in awe. The outer sect disciples on the 36th Sword Peak kept quiet out of fear. Facing the disciplinary hall disciple, their bodies trembled for no reason. The 11th sword of the disciplinary hall was the young man in a black battlesuit. Among the younger generation in the Xinjiang Gate, the 11th sword was also a famous existence. It was said that although he was young, his cultivation was unfathomable. It was enough to make many elders sigh in admiration. "Humph, how dare you!" Hearing this, some of the disciples from the disciplinary hall stared at the group of outer disciples on the 36th sword peak coldly. This kind of cold gaze and formless aura caused the crowd of outer court disciples to tremble in fear, as they were intimidated by the pressure. "Chase them. They can't have gone far." Sword 11's expression darkened. He didn't pay attention to these outer sect disciples. His foot touched the ground, and there was suddenly a burst of yuan qi under his foot. Light flashed under his foot, and the faint black yuan qi light seemed to expand. It condensed into the shadow of a black falcon under his foot, filled with black light. This was the manifestation of vital qi. Sword 11's figure immediately left on the black falcon's shadow. At the same time, the group of Punishment Hall's disciples transformed their yuan qi under their feet and condensed into the phantom of flying demon beasts. However, there were also some people who were unable to condense a flying barbaric demon beast and were carried away by the people around them. Coo! Roar! At the foot of the mountain, several ferocious flying demonic beasts roared as they soared into the sky to provide support. Looking at the disciples of the disciplinary hall who left in a hurry, Su Jiahui and the others heaved a sigh of relief. "Do you think they can catch up with Brother Su-yi?" Someone took a deep breath and asked in a low voice. His gaze was solemn and he was very worried. "They have already set off for some time. I hope they can reach the Holy Sword Cliff earlier," Su Jiahui said. She couldn't lie to the disciples of the disciplinary hall. She had done everything she could. What was left was to hope that Su-yi could reach the Holy Sword Cliff earlier. Even if Sword 11 of the disciplinary hall chased after him, there was nothing he could do. Once they entered the Holy Sword Cliff, no one could barge in and disturb them. Night had already shrouded the mountains. In the air, the Gale Golden Eagle shone brightly. "You can enter the Holy Sword Cliff at any time as long as you have points. It's not far ahead." On the back of the Gale Golden Eagle, Zhang Qing said to Su-yi. The Holy Sword Cliff was not far ahead. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "It's so late. Is there anyone else going to the Holy Sword Cliff?" Su-yi stood on the back of the Gale Golden Eagle and looked into the distance behind him. There were several spots of light flashing in the night sky, and they were getting closer and closer. Roars of beasts were heard. A few flying savage beasts were flying towards them rapidly. They were getting closer and closer. The strange beast in front looked ferocious, but its aura was very powerful. There were several young men standing upright on the back of the strange beast. Their robes were fluttering and they looked fierce. "That is," Zhang Qing squinted her eyes and looked into the distance. When she saw the strange beast clearly, her expression changed instantly. Especially when she saw a young man in his 20s on the back of the strange beast. He was wearing a tight black battle suit and a gray cloak fluttering behind him. His facial features were distinct and his expression was cold. Zhang Qing was even more shocked. "It's Sword 11 of the disciplinary hall. The people from the disciplinary hall are here," Zhang Qing exclaimed. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that they could reach the Holy Sword Cliff smoothly. She did not expect the people from the disciplinary hall to catch up with them. More importantly, it was Sword 11 who was leading them. "Is Sword 11 very strong?" Su-yi looked behind him. With his outstanding soul power, he had already sensed that there were more than 10 disciples from the disciplinary hall chasing after them. They were all in the origin spirit realm, especially the young man in black battlesuit in the lead. He was probably much stronger than Huadongqiu. Senior brother Sword 11's strength is unfathomable. He is also one of the best among the younger generation of disciples in the Xinjian Gate. He is ranked 15th in the Sword Pagoda, Zhang Qing replied. The 15th in the Sword Pagoda was a height that it could only dream of. Su-yi squinted his eyes. He knew about the existence of the Sword Pagoda from Zhang Qing and Su Jiahui. It was said that the Sword Pagoda was very mysterious. It could test one's cultivation and combat strength. The ranking in the Sword Pagoda was equivalent to the ranking of the younger generation in the Xinjian Gate. Among the tens of thousands of young disciples in the Xinjian Gate, being able to be ranked in the top 15 was enough to prove one's strength. Roar, coo, the flying savage beasts behind him flew at full speed. None of them were weaker than the Gale Golden Eagle, especially the strange beast that Sword 11 and the rest were riding. It was extremely fast. When it spread its wings, it stirred up a storm of air. It was already getting closer to the Gale Golden Eagle, and was less than 100 feet away. Do you think you can hide in the Holy Sword Cliff? You can't escape, a disciple from the disciplinary hall said sharply. He already knew Su Yi's purpose, and thought that Su Yi wanted to enter the Holy Sword Cliff, because he was afraid of the disciples from the disciplinary hall. Su Yi's eyes darkened. He exerted a little force on his feet. The gale-hunting eagle immediately spread its wings and leaped horizontally. It then turned 360 degrees and hovered in the air. It flapped its wings slightly and maintained a horizontal position. It looked down at the few flying savage beasts that were chasing after it. Roar! Chapter 374. Coo, several flying savage beasts followed closely behind. All of them had ferocious eyes and a ferocious aura as they stared at the Gale Golden Eagle, Su Yi and Zhang Qing. The fierce gazes of the dozen disciplinary hall disciples also fell on Su Yi. That's him. On the back of the flying savage beast, a yellow-clothed youth spoke from behind Sword 11. He looked at the youth on the Gale Golden Eagle in front of him. Although he had never fought with him, he still had lingering fears. Su Yi and Zhang Qing had seen this yellow-clothed youth before. He was the leader of the disciplinary hall disciples that they had met outside the training hall during the day. In the end, he was frightened away by Su Yi, but now he came with Sword 11. Sword 11's expression was cold. He raised his eyes slightly and sized up Su Yi. There was not much change in his eyes. Come with us. A youth whose cultivation was not below Huang Zhangyu said coldly as he stared coldly at Su Yi. Why should I go with you? Su Yi asked indifferently. Fighting in the training hall and stealing a disciplinary hall disciple's mount. Just these two are enough for you to suffer. The youth's eyes were filled with coldness. The Gale Golden Eagle was a disciplinary hall disciple's mount. He did not know why it was so tame in front of the youth. I'm not the one who started the fight in the training hall. Shouldn't the instigator be punished? Su Yi looked indifferently at the youth and said, As for this mount, which eye of yours saw me stealing it? The mount wants to follow me. What does it have to do with me? If you have the ability, you can call it back. Boy, so what if you have a sharp tongue? I don't care who started the fight in the training hall. In short, you have to be punished. This mount is also in your hands. Could it be that someone from the disciplinary hall gave it to you? The youth said coldly. Ha ha, Su Yi sneered and glanced at the group of disciples from the disciplinary hall. You clearly don't want to be reasonable? Is there a need for my torture chamber to reason with you? If there's a reason, then go and tell the torture chamber's enforcers to surrender. Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. The stern-looking young man said coldly. There was no need for him to waste his breath on an outer sect disciple. Even though it was rumored that this outer sect disciple was amazing, in his opinion, he was just SOSO. Do I need to reason with you? Su Yi's sunken eyes flashed with a crimson brilliance. A sneer appeared on his face as he said coldly, If that's the case, then why should I reason with you? Hearing this, the expressions of the disciplinary hall's disciples changed. This kid is really as arrogant as the rumors say. 4 Look at G Edition D Chapter Section 6 on R Cool 8/Craftsman Net. The stern-looking young man who had been speaking turned completely cold. His face was ashen as he looked at Sue-Yi and said, "Kid, you're refusing a toast. Get down from here." Suddenly, a loud shout came from Sue-Yi's mouth and interrupted the cold young man's words. Boom! A terrifying aura swept out from Sue-Yi's body. Crimson light lingered around him, and his aura was majestic and destructive. His expression was majestic, and his black hair danced in the wind. Roar! Coo! When this aura swept out, the few flying savage beasts were the first to tremble. Their ferocious eyes were immediately replaced by fear. Their bodies trembled and rolled. What's going on? On the backs of the flying beasts, the faces of the torture chamber's disciples changed drastically. Oh no! Someone tried to control the flying beasts, but it was useless. At this moment, the flying beasts seemed to have gone crazy. They rolled rapidly and fell from the sky. Instantly, the disciples on the flying beasts fell down one by one. Roar! Amidst the panic, some disciples Yuan Qi rushed out from their feet and condensed into beasts. However, some of the torture chamber's disciples didn't have time to react and fell in a sorry state. In a panic, some of the torture chamber's disciples couldn't condense the flying beasts and fell from the sky. Bang! 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 Ah, there were muffled sounds and ear-piercing screams. The group of torture chamber's disciples, who had been imposing a moment ago, was now in a mess. Sue-Yi used the aura of the Origin Supreme Art to intimidate the flying beasts. How could the demon spirit realm flying beasts resist the mysterious aura of Sue-Yi? Although the Gale Golden Eagle was afraid of Sue-Yi's aura, it wasn't affected by Sue-Yi's aura on the surface. After the flying beasts fell, they crawled on the ground and trembled. They didn't dare to move at all. Boom! Boom! Roar! Soon, several auras surged, and several beasts' phantoms condensed from Yuan Qi appeared in the sky. Several of the disciplinary hall's disciples had already stabilized their bodies in a panic. Their gazes were filled with cold light as they stared at Sue-Yi with a certain kind of shock in their eyes. The young man's shout was able to make several flying beasts tremble and crawl. This was too shocking. At this moment, not only the torture chamber's disciples were shocked, but Zhang Qing beside Sue-Yi was also shocked. However, she seemed to have become accustomed to Sue-Yi's performance. Under Jian Yi's feet, light flickered. The faint black Yuan Qi light seemed to expand, condensing into the shadow of a black falcon under his feet. It was filled with black light. On his cold face, a ripple finally appeared in his bright eyes. He looked straight at Sue-Yi. "You do have some ability. You are worthy of me taking action." Sue-Yi looked at Jianxi, a red light flashing in his eyes. A top figure of the Xinjiang Gate's younger generation ranked 15th in the Sword Pagoda made Sue-Yi want to fight. But the red light in Sue-Yi's eyes only flashed for a moment before it disappeared. He lightly stepped on the Gale Golden Eagle and said, "Let's go." Screech! The Gale Golden Eagle suddenly screeched, flapped its wings, turned around, and quickly left. "Want to leave? Dream on." A cold snort came from Jianxi's throat. There seemed to be no change of expression on his cold and handsome face. The black falcon phantom under his feet spread its wings and quickly chased after the Gale Golden Eagle. Roar! The remaining few youths from the torture chamber, the beast-shaped phantoms under their feet also rushed out and followed. In an instant, several figures formed their Yuan Qi, condensing into several beast-shaped phantoms, and soared into the air to chase after the Gale Golden Eagle that Sue-Yi was riding. What should we do? They've caught up. On the back of the Gale Golden Eagle, Zhang Qing was trembling with fear. She did not have time to look back. Several torture chamber's disciples had been following behind, especially Jianxi, who was extremely fast. Let's talk about it when we catch up. Chapter 375. Under the night sky, the light flickered and several figures chased after him from the void. Except for Sword 11, the other young men of the torture chamber could not catch up. The moon was bright and the stars were dim. Sword 11's cloak fluttered in the wind. His black battle suit and the shadow of the Black Falcon were like ghosts in the night sky. If it were not for his strong aura, he would have disappeared. He's not weak. On the back of the Gale Golden Eagle, Su-Yi turned around and looked at Sword 11, who was following him closely. He did not expect Sword 11 to be able to follow him so closely. His strength was not ordinary. But Su-Yi's expression did not change. He was very calm and let the Gale Golden Eagle do its best. There was a big difference between the speed of the condensed beast Shadow and the speed of the real flying savage demon beast. Soon, Sword 11's speed was greatly reduced. Sword 11 did his best. His eyes were filled with deep light, like the bright stars in the moonlight night. But he could only watch Su-Yi leave on the Gale Golden Eagle. You can escape now, but you can't escape forever. You definitely can't escape. The faint voice spread in the night sky like a cold wind and fell into Su-Yi's ears. Su-Yi turned around and did not look back. Sword 11 was extraordinary, but his speed in the air was just condensed beast Shadow. He was not as fast as the Gale Golden Eagle. The cliff did not tear the ground, but stood alone among the mountains. It stood tall and supported the deep and vast night sky, like a sharp sword piercing the 9 heavens. The cliff rose into the sky, surrounded by rolling clouds, and the mountains in the distance were faintly discernible. Looking up at the cliff, there were sometimes strange rocks on the peak, but most of the cliff was steep as if it had been cut by an axe. This was the Holy Sword Cliff. Hundreds of feet away, Zhang Qing and Su-Yi jumped off the Gale Golden Eagle. They could not ride the flying savage demon beast to the Holy Sword Cliff. Outside the Holy Sword Cliff, it was not as heavily guarded as Su-Yi had imagined. He did not even see a single expert from Xinjian Gate. At least, Su-Yi didn't see any experts from Xinjian Gate on the surface. Outside the Holy Sword Cliff, there were only a few Xinjian Gate disciples guarding it. In addition to the disciples of Xinjian Gate, Su-Yi also saw some deacons of Xinjian Gate. They were all middle-aged. Judging from the invisible aura on their bodies, their cultivation must be about the same. Zhang Qing lowered her head and bowed as she escorted Su-Yi to the front of the Divine Sword Cliff. It's right in front. Remember to go into seclusion for 5 days. You can't miss the time, Zhang Qing reminded Su-Yi, for fear that Su-Yi would forget the time. Su-Yi nodded. Zhang Qing then turned around and left. He did not plan to go into seclusion. He still wanted to return to the 36th Sword Peak. He didn't make a move in the disciplinary hall, so he wasn't afraid of the disciples of the disciplinary hall. However, just facing them was enough to make him tremble in fear. Su-Yi already knew the steps to enter the Divine Sword Cliff from Zhang Qing. There were hundreds and thousands of caves on the Divine Sword Cliff. They were called sword caves. In each sword cave, there were cultivation experiences or sword moves left behind by the experts of Xinjian Gate from ancient times to the present. ZB Cool, 3 Craftsman Plus Net, Zhengji version C. First Hair YF1 was able to comprehend in seclusion, they would benefit a lot. However, if one wanted to comprehend in seclusion on the Divine Sword Cliff, the price was points. Moreover, the points required in each sword cave were different. After entering the sword cave, as long as one had enough points, the sword cave would be sealed, and no one would be able to enter. It was said that this was a method set up by the ancestors of Xinjian Gate, so that the disciples who were in seclusion wouldn't be disturbed. As long as one had enough points, the sword cave would be sealed without any disturbance. This made Su-Yi feel quite relieved. This was the first time Su-Yi came to the Divine Sword Cliff. Fortunately, the Divine Sword Cliff was not complicated. He already knew the details from Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others. At the bottom of the Divine Sword Cliff, Sui looked up at the peak of the cliff that towered into the night sky. He couldn't help but be shocked and praise the wonders of creation. Every sword cave on the divine sword cliff had a sign on it, indicating how many points were needed to enter seclusion for a day. On the cliff, there were winding stone steps that connected to the various sword cave. The higher the position of the sword cave, the more points were needed. In the sword cave where someone was in seclusion, there was a dazzling light screen. There were also the identity badges of the disciples on it. However, no one could enter. The sword cave where there was no one was also filled with light. There was a light screen covering it, like the ripples of water. However, the light was much dimmer. There didn't seem to be many points in Su Jiahui's badge. She had also reminded Sui that he could only enter the sword cave at the bottom. Sui looked around. On the towering divine sword cliff, there were thousands of sword caves. Perhaps 90% of the sword caves were filled with dazzling light. There were disciples of the Xinjian Gate in seclusion. Moreover, most importantly, the deeper one went into the sword cave, the denser it was, the more people there were. With a pondering look, Sui finally found a sword cave where no one was in seclusion. Outside the sword cave, Sui looked around curiously. There didn't seem to be anything special. Then, he took out Su Jiahui's badge and gently approached the entrance of the sword cave. Hula, when the dim light screen above the sword cave came into contact with Su Jiahui's badge, a dazzling light screen immediately spread out. Vaguely, there were tens of thousands of sword radiances blooming from the light screen, releasing an ancient aura. The same light also spread out from the badge and became crystal clear. Then, from the energy light screen of the sword cave, there were tens of thousands of sword radiances blooming. In the end, they turned into lines of words. Nameless remnant sword technique, left behind by a nameless elder of the Xinjian Gate. Unfortunately, it is only one move. For thousands of years, no one has succeeded in comprehending it. The words flashed and then disappeared. Every sword cave had a detailed introduction so that the disciples could choose whether to enter it for seclusion. It was said that the sword cave at the Divine Sword Cliff didn't only contain swordsmanship and cultivation method. It also contained the experience and comprehension left behind by the experts of the Xinjian Gate. However, looking at the introduction on the sword cave's light screen, Sui was speechless. No wonder there was only one sword cave left. He thought that he had found it. It turned out that no one would choose this sword cave at all. Such a sword cave was at the lowest level of the Divine Sword Cliff. The disciples who came to the bottom of the Divine Sword Cliff to cultivate in seclusion were usually odd job disciples and outer sect disciples. However, in the sword cave, there was only one move of the nameless remnant sword technique left behind. It was only one move and no one had succeeded in comprehending it for thousands of years. The odd job disciples and outer sect disciples who had painstakingly accumulated a pitiful amount of points naturally came to cultivate in seclusion in hopes of being effective. Chapter 376. However, Sui had no other choice. The remaining empty sword caves were at the top of the Holy Sword Cliff, and the points needed to enter them were not enough for him to enter even with the points in Su Jiahui's badge. Originally, Sui wanted to see what kind of place the experts of the Xinjian Gate had left on the Holy Sword Cliff, but now he could only smile bitterly. He had no other choice but to enter. Swish, Sui's silhouette stepped into the light screen. As his silhouette disappeared, the badge floated in the light screen, covering everything. The light in front of him suddenly dimmed a little, but his vision was still clear. Sui looked at the sword cave. It was quite empty inside. Except for an old mottled futon, there was nothing else. Inside the sword cave, there seemed to be some kind of special arrangement, which made the space inside extremely complicated. And on one of the stone walls of the sword cave, there was a mural of a hand holding a sword. The night was like a big gray net, quietly enveloping the entire ancient land. The radiance of the bright moon set off the boundless sky, and the distant mountains were also hidden in the darkness of the night. The earth was sleeping, and the night wind was gentle. Except for the occasional roar of beasts, the 36th Sword Peak was silent. A figure quietly appeared on the 36th Sword Peak. It was unknown how he had appeared. This person came silently, but with the appearance of this old man, the surrounding space seemed to have frozen. This was an old man, with a rather thin cheeks and wrinkles, as if he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. His long eyebrows and some white beard fluttered behind him, as if he had a somewhat sage-like temperament. The old man's eyes were particularly bright in the night sky. He glanced around and was about to move forward, but suddenly, he raised his eyes and looked behind him. Behind the old man, a figure quietly appeared. He was about 60 years old, and his long black hair was carefully combed into a bun. There was not a single strand of hair out of place. However, his silver eyebrows were clearly visible under the moonlight and were very eye-catching. The old man's slightly sunken eye sockets revealed a pair of deep brown eyes that seemed to be able to tell the vicissitudes of life. Lu Baimei, what are you doing at the 36th Sword Peak? When he saw the white-browed old man suddenly appear, the white-bearded old man's expression immediately became somewhat unsightly. He opened his mouth slightly and his tone seemed to carry a hint of anger. Then what are you doing in the 36th Sword Peak, Yu Chongqing? As an elder of Shenzhen Gate, it doesn't seem to fit your identity to run around in the middle of the night. Lu Baimei said faintly. The expression on his face seemed to be the same as Elder Yu Chongqing's, a little unsightly. Elder Yu Chongqing was at a loss for words. But soon, Elder Yu Chongqing squeezed out a smile on his thin and wrinkled face. His eyes darkened as he laughed softly. I'm here to see Elder Su. After all, everyone knows about my relationship with Elder Su in the Shenzhen Gate. Bullshit, everyone knows that Elder Su is not in the gate these days. Why are you here to see Elder Su? Just as Elder Yu Chongqing finished speaking, Lu Baimei directly scolded without any trace of politeness. Do I need your permission to come to the 36th Sword Peak? Didn't you come to the 36th Sword Peak in the middle of the night? Elder Yu Chongqing's eyes moved. Since he could no longer deceive this guy, he no longer needed to be polite. Haha, the two elders are also here. Suddenly, such a hearty voice sounded. As the voice faded, a figure appeared out of thin air beside Elder Yu Baimei and Elder Yu Chongqing. The newcomer was much younger than Elder Yu Chongqing and Elder Yu Chongqing. He looked to be less than 50 years old. His obsidian-like black pupils flashed with an awe-inspiring heroic aura in the moonlight. Under his seemingly calm eyes, there seemed to be a hidden sharpness hidden at all times. The newcomer was middle-aged. His facial features were deep, and he was rather handsome. He must have been a handsome young man when he was young. But now that he was middle-aged, there was a hint of maturity and steadiness to him, and he gave off a dignified aura. Although this handsome middle-aged man looked younger than Elder Yu Chongqing and Elder Yu Chongqing, the formless aura coming from his body was not the slightest bit inferior to the two of them. Shangguan Hu, what are you doing at the 36th Sword Peak? Shangguan Hu, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? Seeing the handsome middle-aged man, Elder Yu Chongqing and Elder Yu Chongqing spoke in unison, as if they were facing a common enemy. Their gazes stared unhappily at Shangguan Hu. I'm here to see if Elder Su has returned yet. Shangguan Hu's expression did not reveal anything as he replied to the two of them, but his gaze was already stealthily surveying his surroundings. To think that the three elders have all come. What a coincidence! As the faint voice faded, another figure appeared. Elder Duan has also come. Seeing the newcomer, Shangguan Hu raised his eyes. Although his expression was secretly changing, his attitude was rather good. The newcomer was an old woman, her face filled with love and the vicissitudes of life. Her long hair was no longer youthful, but each strand of silver was faintly discernible. However, her face was extremely rosy and glossy. Duan Yurong, what are you doing here? Duan Yuerong, you've also come? F/Q version. However, Elder Lu Baimei and Elder Yu Chongqing's attitudes were not any better, their gazes indifferently shooting a glance at the old woman. If you can come, why can't I? This 36 sword peak is not your territory, what a joke. Seeing the attitudes of Elder Lu Baimei and Elder Yu Chongqing, Elder Duan Yuerong's attitude was also not pleasant. Where's Mei Huaya? Elder Lu Baimei did not seem to care about Elder Duan Yuerong's attitude at all. He raised his eyebrows and continued to ask. How would I know? I have nothing to do with him. Elder Duan Yuerong seemed to be very displeased. Oh no, it's Mei Huaya. He wants to be the first to arrive. Duan Yuerong deliberately came to delay us. Suddenly, Yu Chongqing seemed to have discovered something. His figure flashed, and he immediately turned into a flash of lightning and swept directly to a courtyard in front of him. Greetings, Elder Mei. In the courtyard, a dozen outer disciples of the 36th Sword Peak, led by Su Jiahui, were trembling at this moment. At this moment, they all knelt on the ground and saluted with reverence in their eyes, not daring to look directly at them. In the courtyard, an old man with a mustache, brown eyes that were sunken into his eye sockets, and a head of unkempt gray hair was scanning Su Jiahui and the other outer sect disciples carefully. He asked, Who's called Su Yi? This. Chapter 377. Su Jiahui recognized the old man in front of her. It was Mei Huaya from the gate. Su Jiahui had seen this elder from afar during a grand event at the Xinjian Gate. This was a dignified elder of the Divine Sword sect. He was a terrifying expert. No matter where he went, he would be treated as a guest of honor and would be revered by the authorities. Elder Mei, Su Yi is not here, Su Jiahui said. She did not dare to hide anything in front of an elder. She did not know why Elder Mei would come to the 36th Sword Peak. Could it be that Su Yi had caused trouble, that even an elder was alarmed? Where did Su Yi go? Hearing this, Mei Huaya's brown eyes flashed and his brows furrowed. Elder Mei, you are really in a good mood to come to the 36th Sword Peak in the middle of the night. As such a voice sounded, a figure silently appeared. His cheeks were rather thin and wrinkled, and his white beard fluttered in the wind. He had a somewhat sage-like temperament. It was Elder Yu Chongqing. Elder Mei, you are in a good mood. Then another voice sounded. In the courtyard, several figures appeared. One was an old man with hair tied up in a bun. His silver eyebrows were very eye-catching. A handsome middle-aged man with obsidian-like bright and dazzling black eyes flashed with awe-inspiring spirit. He had a dignified temperament. Finally, there was an old woman with a face full of vicissitudes of life. Her silver hair was half-covered, faintly discernible, and her face was extremely rosy. At this moment, the several people who came were Elder Yu Chongqing, Lu Baimei, Shangguan Hu, and Duan Yuerong. Aren't you all here too? Elder Mei Huaya did not seem to be surprised by the arrival of Elder Yu Chongqing, Lu Baimei, Shangguan Hu, and Duan Yuerong. His brows furrowed slightly. He just felt that these four people had come so quickly. When several more elders came, Su Jiahui and the others were already dumbfounded. They could not help but tremble and did not even dare to raise their heads. At this moment, the surrounding void was completely enveloped. It was as if there were tens of thousands of mountains crushing down on their hearts, making it difficult for them to breathe and circulate the yuan qi in their bodies. Usually, when they were on the 36th Sword Peak, neither their grandmother nor their uncle loved them. As an outer core disciple, he didn't have much status in Xinjian Gate. Compared to the handyman disciples, he wasn't much better. Normally, it was already amazing to have the chance to see a deacon. They didn't even have the chance to see a protector. However, they didn't expect that tonight 5 elders would appear in front of them. If we didn't come, would we have fulfilled your wish? Elder Lu Baimei rolled his eyes at Elder Mei Huaye as he glanced at Su Jiahui and other outer disciples who were still kneeling on the ground. Looks like all of you are here for the same thing, Elder Mei Huaye said indifferently. His expression seemed calm, but his eyes were secretly twitching. I don't know why you're here. Whether you're here for Elder Su or for some nominal disciples. Lu Baimei's eyes twitched, and he said seriously, I'm here for an outer core disciple, Su Yi. I heard that this outer core disciple was audacious. Yesterday, an inner core disciple on my sword peak was seriously injured by him in the training hall. I have to punish this disciple. Haha, an inner court disciple is actually able to make Elder Lu come out personally. Isn't this a little too much face? Shangguan Hu smiled faintly. Elder Lu Baimei was obviously lying through his teeth. Don't hide it. I guess all of you are here for the same purpose. Don't forget, after all, this is the 36th sword peak, Duan Yuerong said. Hearing this, the elders' eyes flickered, and their expressions were different. He's just an outer core disciple. Elder Su has never accepted a disciple, Lu Baimei said softly. If the rumors are true, placing him on the 36th sword peak is also a loss to our Xinjian gate, Yu Chongqing said. Whether the rumors are true or not, we'll know after we verify it, Shangguan Hu said. Humph. Hearing Elder Duan Yuerong's words, Elder Mei Huaye rolled his eyes, looking very disdainful. Elder Duan Yuerong ignored Elder Mei Huaye. She looked at Yu Chongqing and the other 2 elders and smiled. Her kind face revealed a smile as she said, It seems like everyone's goal is the same. Then, Elder Duan Yuerong said to Su Jiahui and other disciples, who had been trembling on the ground, Get up and say something. No need to be so polite. Thank you very much, Elder. Su Jiahui and other disciples stood up trembling, but at this moment in the courtyard, they felt as if they were crushed by hundreds of thousands of mountains. When they finally got up, they bent down and lowered their eyes, not daring to look directly. Is Sui here? Elder Duan Yuerong asked. Elder, Sui has gone to the Divine Sword Cliff to cultivate in seclusion. He just went there not long ago. Su Jiahui did not dare to hide the truth, but she felt uneasy and worried about Sui. She did not know what kind of trouble Sui had caused that the 5 elders had to come here. This was going to be big trouble. Divine Sword Cliff. Hearing this, the 5 elders present were all stunned. Sigh, Elder Su is not here. I think I'll visit Elder Su next time, Elder Yu Chongqing said. Then, he flicked his sleeves, stood with his hands behind his back, and left immediately. Sui is not here. He has gone to the Divine Sword Cliff. I'll punish him next time, Elder Lu Baimei said and left immediately, afraid that he would be slower than Elder Yu Chongqing. Elder Mei Huaye and Elder Shangguan Hu did not say anything, but they left immediately. Elder Duan Yuerong was the only one who did not follow them. Instead, she asked Su Jiahui, What's your name? Elder, I'm Su Jiahui. Su Jiahui was very nervous and did not dare to look up. Su Jiahui. Elder Duan Yuerong's eyes were bright on her ruddy face. She looked at Su Jiahui and asked, How old are you? How long have you been in the Xinjian Gate? I'm almost 16. I've been in the Xinjian Gate for more than 4 years, Su Jiahui replied. There are not many disciples in the Xinjian Gate at such a young age, Elder Duan Yuerong said. She was still looking at Su Jiahui. More than 4 years, 16 years old. That meant that Su Jiahui had been in the Xinjian Gate before she was 12 years old. Xinjian Gate usually recruited disciples when they were 14 or 15 years old. There were not many disciples who were in the Mountain Gate at 11 or 12 years old, unless they had some special connections. Because my family's elder was an external disciple in the gate. That's why I was able to enter the Xinjian Gate, Su Jiahui answered honestly. Swish. Chapter 378. This power was very gentle, but when it entered Su Jiahui's body, it caused the yuan qi in her body to boil as if it had encountered a flame. The yuan qi in Su Jiahui's body immediately surged, and her eyes glowed. Everything was out of her control. 8th level Essence Soul Stage, 16 years of age. It's a pity for you to stay on the 36th Sword Peak with such talent. When the light dimmed, Elder Duan Yuerong withdrew her hand. Her gaze wavered as she looked at Su Jiahui and said, "How about you come back with me and become an inner disciple for the time being? If you can reach the profound Yuan stage within a year, it's possible for you to become my direct disciple." Inner disciple, and possibly even become a direct disciple. When these words landed in her ears, Su Jiahui's gaze suddenly trembled, and her entire body could not help but tremble. Directly becoming an outer disciple, and an elder had personally announced it. To any outer disciple of the Xinjian Gate, this was definitely a joyous occasion. It was an irresistible temptation and opportunity. Su Jiahui still remembered the instructions of the elders in her family. She must work hard in her cultivation and strive to become an inner disciple of the Xinjian Gate. At that time, the entire family's efforts to nurture and send her into the Xinjian Gate would not have been in vain. Her talent was not weak to begin with. However, in the Xinjian Gate, where there were extraordinary talents everywhere, this kind of talent was not considered much. Especially after reaching the 36th Sword Peak, everything was different from what Su Jiahui had originally imagined. Over the years, she had only relied on her own silent efforts to increase her strength. Fortunately, the heavens did not disappoint those who worked hard. She had relied on her own efforts, and her cultivation had always been considered passable among the outer disciples of the same batch. Inner disciple, when they heard Elder Duan Yuerong's words, the group of outer disciples' eyes burned with passion. They immediately lowered their heads and looked at Su Jiahui with incomparable envy. The outer disciples had always worked hard in the hope of becoming inner disciples one day. However, this opportunity had now been placed in front of Su Jiahui. Many thanks to Elder Su for his favor. This disciple is humbled. However, Elder Su has yet to return, so this disciple is unable to make the decision. However, under the envious gazes of the outer sect disciples, Su Jiahui secretly bit the corner of her lips with her pearly white teeth. She said to Elder Duan Yuerong, "You're just an outer sect disciple," Duan Yuerong said. "If you want to go to my place, you don't need to ask Elder Su." Su Jiahui plucked up her courage and looked up. Her eyes were as clear as water on her delicate face. She said to Elder Su, "I know, but before Elder Su left, he told me to look after the 36th Sword Peak. I can't go to the other Sword Peaks. When Elder Su comes back, I will report to him. If Elder Su is still willing, I am willing to serve you." This was a great opportunity. For any outer sect disciple of Xinjian Gate, this opportunity was enough to make them excited. This was the same for Su Jiahui. On the 36th Sword Peak, she was equivalent to a handyman disciple. She would not get any opportunities, let alone Elder Su to guide her. However, Su Jiahui knew very well that Elder Su had always taken good care of her. Elder Su, who was feared by everyone, had a bad reputation in the entire Xinjian Gate. However, Su Jiahui felt that Elder Su was not what everyone said. Every time Elder Su went out, he was used to letting her take care of the 36th Sword Peak. Even if she wanted to leave, she had to tell Elder Su in person. Hearing Su Jiahui's words and looking at Su Jiahui, Elder Duan Yuerong was a little surprised. However, there was a touch of appreciation in her eyes. She smiled and asked, "Then tell me, is Su Yi really an outer sect disciple on the 36th Sword Peak?" Hearing this, Su Jiahui avoided her eyes and said, "Su Yi was brought back by Elder Su. As for other things we don't know about Elder Su, let alone dare to ask. Is that so? Elder Duan Yuerong's expression changed slightly. She did not know whether to believe it or not. When Elder Su comes back, if you want to come, you can come to the 9th Sword Peak and find me. As soon as she finished speaking, Elder Duan Yuerong's figure disappeared. After all the elders left, the outer sect disciples on the 36th Sword Peak finally dared to look up. When they stood up, they were already drenched in sweat. There are so many elders here. All of them are here to look for Brother Su-yi. Seems like Brother Su-yi has caused too much trouble this time around. Even the elders have been alerted. After a while, a disciple spoke. He could not calm down and was panting heavily. Are these elders really here to look for trouble with Su-yi? Su Jiahui muttered to herself. She felt that these elders were here for Su-yi, but they were not really here to look for trouble. Su-yi's name was still spreading like a storm in the entire Xinjiang Gate. In the void in front of the Holy Sword Cliff, several figures appeared quietly in midair. Several gazes swept across the Holy Sword Cliff like stars in the sky and then disappeared quietly. In a small square in front of the Holy Sword Cliff, there were mottled shadows under the moonlight. A young man in his 20s, wearing a tight black battlesuit, was muscular and well-proportioned. His gray cloak fluttered slightly in the wind. The young man stood quietly in front of the Holy Sword Cliff. His chiseled face looked cold as he stared at the Holy Sword Cliff. Swoosh, swoosh, many figures came. They were quite young and had an extraordinary temperament. However, they all looked a little embarrassed. Go back. I will wait here. He will come out of seclusion one day. Sword 11 said to the people behind him. He did not turn his head and his eyes were fixed on the Holy Sword Cliff. Senior Brother 11, that kid is in seclusion at the Holy Sword Cliff. I don't know how long he will take. The Myriad Sword Conference will be held soon. A young man said to Sword 11. He is just an outer sect disciple. Unless he doesn't participate in the Myriad Sword Conference, he will come out sooner or later. No one can escape from the torture chamber. Sword 11's eyes were sharp and cold. Stone cave, stone wall, mural. Su-yi stared blankly in front of a mural holding a sword. He looked carefully and studied it. After a few hours, he still did not find anything. There is nothing special about the picture on the mural. On the contrary, it looks extremely simple. On the mural, an elder seemed to be looking forward. His left hand was hanging naturally and his right arm was stretched out parallel to his shoulder. He was holding a long sword in his right hand. Chapter 379. Nameless Broken Sword Art, only one move. Su-yi smiled bitterly. Several hours had passed and he had not gained anything. No wonder no one had been able to comprehend the Xinjiang Gate for thousands of years. There was no way to comprehend such a mural. Since he could not comprehend it, Su-yi gave up. He originally thought that he had gained something, but now he was slightly disappointed. Seems like I can do something. Immediately, Su-yi's eyes moved. He remembered that there was something special about the sword cave. No one could come in and disturb him, so he could check some mysterious spaces. Most importantly, he had recently received many space bags from the inner disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. He could check the space bags and see if there was anything inside. There might be some cultivation techniques or martial skills. The mysterious space must not be exposed. Therefore, Su-yi did not even think about exiting the mysterious space when he was in the Xinjiang Gate. There were many experts in the Xinjiang Gate. Once the mysterious space was exposed, he would be in big trouble. Killing and seizing treasures was very common in this world. Back in the barbaric demon forest, Wang Chuanda of the Sacred Mountain had done the same. However, at this moment the sword cave was rather suitable. Only the special effects of the mysterious space could open these spatial bags that had been sealed with restrictions. Sitting cross-legged, Su Yi's hands formed mysterious and complicated hand seals. Suddenly, there was a faint fluctuation of light between his eyebrows. It rippled with divine splendor and then spread throughout his body, enveloping him in an instant. The dazzling light was hazy, densely covering the sword cave. When Su Yi's figure reappeared, he was already in the mysterious space. Although he had not obtained primordial stones for a long time, the spiritual qi in the mysterious space was still dense and oppressive. It was much denser than the spiritual qi of heaven and earth in any blessed land. The mysterious space was hazy and ethereal, emitting a faint light, as if it was isolated from the space. Cultivating here had the effect of getting twice the result with half the effort. However, Su Yi could not frequently enter here to cultivate. He had been wandering around to hone his skills, and the mysterious space could not be exposed. Entering the familiar mysterious space, Su Yi took a deep breath. The space here was not small, but it had been a long time since he had obtained any primordial stones, so the energy of heaven and earth had become much weaker. "Why haven't you come in for so long?" As Su Yi came in, the blood jade spirit ginseng was startled and opened its eyes. The verdant leaves on top of its head stretched out and emitted light. "Grandpa Ginseng, how's your recovery?" Su Yi smiled and stepped forward. "You've recovered well, much better than I expected." Hearing this, the blood jade spirit ginseng's heart couldn't help but tremble. Only it knew that the benefits it obtained here were much better than what it had expected. "Perhaps it won't be long before I can transcend the tribulation again," the blood jade spirit ginseng continued. It could not hide the excitement in its eyes. If it could go through the heavenly tribulation again, it could continue to break through. "Congratulations, Grandpa Ginseng." Su Yi was also happy for the blood jade spirit ginseng. The higher the level of the blood jade spirit ginseng, the greater the chance of curing his grandfather. With a spiritual item like the blood jade spirit ginseng, Grandpa Ginseng should not have to pay the full price. During this period of time with the blood jade spirit ginseng, Su Yi did not want Grandpa Ginseng to pay the full price. Looking at Su Yi, the blood jade spirit ginseng said, "Brat, I've received benefits from you. With this treasured land, I was able to recover so quickly, and I also obtained many benefits. You kept me here because you want something, right?" The blood jade spirit ginseng was not stupid. It was a spiritual item, and it had cultivated for hundreds of years. How could it not see that Su Yi kept it in this treasured land? Naturally, he wanted something. "To tell you the truth, my grandfather is seriously injured, and I don't know how he is now." Su Yi did not hide anything. Thinking about his grandfather's situation, and he had been out for so long, he felt quite emotional. He looked at the blood jade spirit ginseng and said, "I think that with Grandpa Ginseng's ability and use, you should be able to cure my grandfather when the time comes. It's just that I don't know how much effort Grandpa Ginseng will need." Su Yi did not hide anything. Originally, he had planned to stew the blood jade spirit ginseng to cure his grandfather's injuries. However, after spending this period of time with the blood jade spirit ginseng, as well as the fact that it was also a spiritual item, Su Yi changed his mind. If Grandpa Ginseng could cure his grandfather's injuries without paying a huge price, that would be great. Looking at the expression on Su Yi's face, the blood jade spirit ginseng asked Su Yi, "What is your grandfather's cultivation level?" "Maybe the true essence realm, maybe the true essence realm, maybe not the true essence realm." Su Yi raised his eyebrows. When he was in Man City, he was only in the essence soul realm. At that time, he could not see his grandfather's cultivation level. However, compared to Wang Chuanda's cultivation level, Su Yi could only make a rough estimate. "I've received benefits from you. When the time comes, no matter what, I will help your grandfather heal. With your grandfather's cultivation level, I shouldn't need to pay a huge price." The blood jade spirit ginseng nodded, and the leaves on its head emitted rings of light. "That's great. Su-yi was very happy. If that was the case, that would be great. Seeing that the blood jade spirit ginseng seemed to be confident, it seemed that, if there was a chance, he would have to make a trip back to Man City. Even if he had to sneak back, at least nothing could happen to his grandfather. Naturally, the sooner he healed, the better. 14. I'll continue. You can do as you please. After the blood jade spirit ginseng finished speaking, it continued to cultivate as if this was its space. Su-yi was happy. There was a chance to heal his grandfather's injuries, so naturally, he was happy. After that, Su-yi sat down cross-legged and began to get down to business. He took out a pile of spatial bags. There were many of these spatial bags, and they were all taken by Su-yi from the inner disciples of the 15th Sword Peak. Although he was a true soul controller, his soul power was his forte. He could definitely try to open the restrictions on these spatial bags. However, Su-yi did not plan to slowly try it himself. Anyway, with the mysterious space, it did not matter if he wanted primal stones. He could rely on the mysterious space to open the restrictions on these spatial bags. Hula! Then, Su-yi formed a hand seal. There was a fluctuation of primal chi, and it shone brightly. He controlled the fluctuation of primal chi in his palm, and his soul power quietly spread out. Along with the primal chi, it wrapped around the spatial bags in his palm. Boom! As Su-yi thought, when the primal chi in his palm touched the spatial bags, a mysterious power directly surged out of the mysterious space. Chapter 380. Su-yi could clearly sense that there was a mysterious power in the mysterious light, and it was devouring some kind of energy from the interspatial bags at the moment. All of a sudden, the interspatial bags shone dazzlingly, and there was a surging energy fluctuation. Boom! At the same time, the mysterious space trembled, and it was not difficult for the entire space to be affected. A dazzling light flickered and bloomed in the depths of the void, but it soon disappeared, and the restrictions on the interspatial bags were quietly removed. This continued for 4 hours, and all of the interspatial bags in front of Su-yi had their restrictions removed. At the same time, the mysterious space's area did not increase or expand, but the universe's energy in the space increased at a speed visible to the naked eye. Su-yi was not surprised by all of this because the mysterious space had absorbed all of the primordial stones in the interspatial bag. Judging from the density of the energy in the mysterious space, he reckoned that there were quite a lot of primordial stones in the interspatial bags. Ba-yi and the others were worthy of being inner sect disciples from major sects, and each of them had a high net worth. This made Su-yi more curious about the remaining items in the interspatial bags. Subsequently, Su-yi opened the interspatial bags in front of him, and piles of primordial stone powder scattered on the ground along with treasures. Pills, weapons, spiritual medicines, low-rank moon-grade pills, middle-rank moon-grade pills, high-rank moon-grade pills. These are star-grade pills, right? A red pill caught Su-yi's attention. It was dazzling, and its energy fluctuation was shocking. It had a flowing luster, and it was crystal clear. A vital energy pill. All of a sudden, Su-yi trembled as he recognized the pill. A vital energy pill was a star-grade beginner pill. A pill of this level could not be compared to a star-grade pill. Unexpectedly, Su-yi only found a few scrolls among the interspatial bags, and there were only a few sets of martial arts skills. After careful inspection, Su-yi discovered that these martial arts techniques were only ordinary. There was only one set of fist technique that was a king-grade martial arts technique, and the rest were only martial-grade martial arts technique. They were not even Shin-jian gate martial arts technique. Su-yi had no plans on cultivating in these martial techniques. Just the martial techniques that came with the Heaven Fei Ancient Sutra were enough for him. This kind of martial skill scroll could only be opened once. There was no need to cultivate it, so opening it would be a waste. Although Su-yi wasn't interested in martial grade and king grade martial skills, he knew that the entire Su family didn't have any martial grade martial skills. A martial grade martial skill was already extraordinary. Moreover, there was also a king grade fist martial skill. It would be perfect for the Su clan. In addition, there were many weapons. Some of them were even at the level of profound weapons, but there were no particularly shocking treasures. Su-yi checked all the items in the interspatial bag. He wasn't disappointed, but he wasn't too happy either. Still, he had gained a lot. At the very least, the energy in the mysterious space had increased by a lot. The value of the elixirs and spiritual herbs added together was astonishing. After putting away all his gains, Su-yi planted the spiritual herbs that could be planted and placed the elixirs in the mysterious space to increase their level. Then, he left the mysterious space. The entire Xinjiang Gate was in an uproar because of Su-yi's name. It set off a huge storm. When a personal disciple like Hua Dongqiu was defeated by Su-yi in one move, and it was rumored that Su-yi was only 15 or 17 years old, it shocked the entire Xinjiang Gate. In addition, the disciplinary hall's 11th sword personally led the team, but he failed to capture Su-yi and allowed him to enter the divine sword cliff. This also shocked the Xinjiang Gate disciples. This is incredible. Is there going to be another monster in the Xinjiang Gate? I don't know if the rumors are false. Can a personal disciple be so powerful? Senior brother 11th sword personally went out, but he still couldn't catch that guy. He really has guts. The disciples in the Xinjiang Gate and on the various sword peaks were discussing this matter. 11th sword is guarding the divine sword cliff. He wants to capture that guy personally. The Myriad Sword Conference is the day after tomorrow. If that outer disciple wants to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference, he must come out tomorrow. 11th Sword of the Disciplinary Hall had been guarding the Divine Sword Cliff these days. When the news spread, it caused a huge commotion. It was dusk again. The sunset was thick. In the courtyard, smoke rose in spirals from the incense burner, and a faint fragrance filled the air. Situ Luyun stood in front of the window, looking at the afterglow of the setting sun. She wore a black robe embroidered with golden silk patterns, outlining her muscular body. Her long black hair was neatly combed into a bun on her head. Haha, interesting. It's getting more and more interesting. Situ Luyun smiled. Her deep eyes flashed with light, and she unconsciously revealed a natural domineering aura. Sect leader, that guy is really capable. He actually escaped from the hands of 11th Sword. A gray-robed old man in his 50s smiled bitterly at this moment. Mixed with shock and surprise, he said to Situ Luyun, "It is said that Elder Yu, Elder Mei, Elder Lu, Elder Duan, and Elder Shangguan who have all been to the 36th Sword Peak. They are really fast, but it seems that they are one step behind." Situ Luyun sighed secretly, and there seemed to be a little disappointment in her eyes. 6ch head square root % hair, 11th sword, has been at the Divine Sword Cliff for 4 days and 4 nights. It seems that he is determined to catch that guy. The gray-robed old man continued. Then let's see who is stronger between him and 11th sword. Situ Luyun smiled slightly, as if she did not care at all. The gray-robed old man felt helpless and forced a smile. The sect leader's attitude was beyond his expectations. He frowned and said, "But if this continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to clean up the mess." "How big of a mess can it get? Don't tell me a little guy like him can really overturn the heavens." Situ Luyun smiled at the gray-robed old man, as if there was no need to worry. "That's right. It's a pity that Elder Su has not come back yet. I don't know who that guy is." The gray-robed old man's eyebrows moved slightly, and he said softly, "If that guy is not taken in by Elder Su, then it's a pity." When the middle-aged man heard this, there was some fluctuation in his eyes. "Sect leader, if that guy is really not a disciple of our Xinjiang Gate, then what The gray-robed old man seemed to see Cityluyun's thoughts and asked tentatively, "Let's wait and see. When Elder Su comes back, it will naturally be clear." Cityluyun pondered for a while and said to the gray-robed old man. In the sword cave at this moment, Su-yi stood upright, staring at the mural on the stone wall. Chapter 381. Coming out from the mysterious space, Su-yi was bored out of his mind. Just as he was contemplating whether he should leave seclusion in advance, he stared at the mural and sized it up curiously. He inadvertently made a new discovery. On the mural, there was a figure standing with a sword in hand. Su-yi no longer held any hopes of comprehending anything and had no idea where to start. It was precisely because of this that he discovered some clues. The mural was quietly carved on the stone wall and had existed for a long time. It did not seem to be a sword move, but more like an aura that emitted an invisible aura. Su-yi comprehended something and gradually sank into it. This sword cave was very quiet, just enough for Su-yi to immerse himself fully. In terms of comprehension, Su-yi's perception had always been indisputable. After all, he was a reincarnated human. Strictly speaking, Su-yi had only cultivated for a short period of time, and he was already at level 3 essence spirit realm. Which of the top geniuses of the large sects did not need more than 10 years to reach the essence spirit realm? Although it was entirely possible for the large sects to raise a person's strength to a terrifying level within a few years with peerless treasures. But such actions were much more serious than spoiling a seedling through excessive enthusiasm. As for Su-yi, he did not use any heaven-defying treasures and had always relied on his own cultivation. Although possessing the Origin Supreme technique and the mysterious space were one of the reasons, Su-yi's perception was absolutely inseparable. Otherwise, Su-yi would not have been able to break through to the Essence Spirit Realm in such a short period of time. Level 3 Essence Spirit Realm, at the age of 15 or 16, was already shocking. If others knew that Su-yi was even unable to cultivate normally not long ago, they would most likely be even more shocked. Looking at the mural, Su-yi comprehended wholeheartedly, as if he was gradually fusing into it. At this very moment, Su-yi seemed to have fused into one with the mural. _V original _ first release. The figure on the mural seemed to have come alive. That treasured sword resonated with wind and thunder, radiating brilliance and a sharp aura. Unknowingly, time slowly passed. Su-yi seemed to be completely unaware of the passage of time. At this moment, Su-yi felt as if the mural was alive. It was as if he had become one with the mural. Gradually, Su-yi's posture became exactly the same as the figure on the mural. An invisible fierce aura spread out and rippled around his body. His figure was ramrod straight and unmoving like a mountain. It was clearly the most ordinary posture, but at this moment, it gave off an unshakable feeling. It was as if that posture contained endless potential and pressure that was indescribably wonderful. Once it changed, it would stir up a storm and sweep out in all directions. Su-yi carefully comprehended it, fully immersing himself in it. At some point in time, a sword light seemed to appear in his eyes, surging with a sharp chi. Within the sword cave, Su-yi had cast aside everything. He'd forgotten that he was at Xinjian Gate and the trouble he'd caused. All that remained was comprehension, and he was immersed in a wonderful state of comprehension. The next morning, in Xinjian Gate, the 72 sword peaks overlapped with each other. They were verdant like the undulating waves of the sea, majestic and magnificent. Between the mountains, the vast sea of clouds was like a waving white veil, like a fairyland. In front of the divine sword cliff, the sky had just begun to brighten when people gradually came over. There were more and more people. In the end, the small square was packed with people, making the square, which was not big to begin with, look densely packed with figures. Tomorrow is the day of the Myriad Sword Conference. That kid will come out today no matter what. He's only an outer disciple, unless he doesn't want to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. Outer sect disciples must participate tomorrow, unlike inner sect disciples and personal disciples. Su-yi will definitely come out today. Senior Brother 11th Sword has waited for 5 days and 5 nights. He will definitely not let that kid go. That Su-yi doesn't even put the torture chamber in his eyes. Senior Brother 11th Sword will naturally not let him go. In the crowd, all kinds of discussions gradually became clamorous. In the center of the square, Sword 11th Sword sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. He wore a tight black battle suit that decorated his muscular and well-proportioned body. His eyes were closed on his three-dimensional face, and his expression was cold. In the sword cave, everything was calm. The ancient mottled murals, unknowingly, began to emit light and shadow. Crack crack, a slight cracking sound spread. For some reason, the ancient murals were filled with tiny cracks that spread out densely. Soon, the murals were covered with dense cracks, and the light dimmed and disappeared. Chi-Chi, at this moment, Su-yi, who was immersed in a certain state, suddenly had 2 sword lights in his eyes. Then, the sword light in his eyes disappeared. Su-yi's eyes were deep and full of spirit, giving people a feeling of emptiness. There was a kind of otherworldly aura, but it also contained a kind of great pressure. Exhaling from his stomach, Su-yi's body had strands of light fluctuations, and there was a crimson aura that went in and out of his ears and nose. Then, the corners of Su-yi's mouth curved into a smile, and he seemed to be in a good mood and was very happy. Nameless incomplete sword technique, so that's how it is, Su-yi muttered to himself. Without a doubt, he had comprehended something from the murals and obtained great benefits. Looking at the murals that had cracked for some unknown reason, Su-yi was very puzzled. He didn't know if he had comprehended a sword move, but he had indeed gained some benefits. Everyone who came in and faced the murals presumably wanted to comprehend a sword move. But at this moment, Su-yi knew that the murals did indeed contain a sword move, but more importantly, the murals contained a kind of sword intent. I've only comprehended a little, and I'm still very far away from true success. Then, Su-yi whispered. Although he had gained something, he guessed that it was only superficial. After a few days of comprehension, Su-yi realized that the murals seemed to contain endless mysteries. Suddenly, Su-yi looked at the light screen of the sword cave behind him and felt something. He turned his head and looked at it. The badge on the light screen began to dim, and the light screen also began to fluctuate. Are there no more points? Su-yi looked at Su Jiahui's badge, and it seemed that there were no more points in it. Then, Su-yi took out a large number of badges from his arms, which were different from the badges on Su Jiahui's body. These badges also belonged to the disciples of the Xinjian Gate, but they were different from the badges on Su Jiahui's body. There were differences in texture and color, and Su-yi had obtained them from Ba-yi, Huadongqiu, and the others. Su-yi judged that these badges must have a lot of points, which should be enough for him to cultivate in seclusion in the various sword caves in the Divine Sword Cliff. But he estimated that he had to attend the Myriad Sword Conference, and there was no time to continue cultivating in seclusion. Chapter 382. These disciples were all busybodies. They all wanted to see if Su-yi would come out of seclusion today. Once Su-yi came out of seclusion today, Sword 11 would definitely not let him go. There would be a shocking battle. Sword 11 was one of the best among the younger generation of disciples in Xinjian Gate. He was ranked 15th on the Sword Pagoda. Many of the personal disciples in Xinjian Gate could only dream of reaching his position. Any battle of Sword 11 would cause a huge commotion in Xinjian Gate. He would be the center of attention. Today, Sword 11 would most likely fight with an outer disciple who had been in the limelight recently. The fact that he was going to arrest this outer disciple was enough to arouse the interest of many people. Roar, roar in the distant sky, the roar of beasts could be heard. Many flying savage beasts were flying over. The backs of these flying savage beasts were filled with figures. They are from the disciplinary hall. Why are there so many of them here? The disciples looked up and saw the figures on the backs of the flying savage beasts. Those were the mounts of the disciplinary hall. The people on them were all disciples of the disciplinary hall. The disciples of the disciplinary hall were actually from the various sword peaks. They were the best among the personal disciples and inner disciples selected from the various sword peaks. In addition to the special status of the disciplinary hall, the disciples of the disciplinary hall usually had a higher status than the personal disciples in the mountain gate. Usually, no disciple would provoke the disciples of the disciplinary hall. This was to avoid being caught by the disciples of the disciplinary hall. Everyone knew that the disciples of the disciplinary hall were the most difficult to provoke. Not only did they have protective amulets, but they were also very powerful. They must be here to cheer. I heard that the disciplinary hall was tricked by Sue-E last time. Really? That Sue-E dared to play around with the people from the torture hall? In the crowd, some people whispered to each other. There were many deacons on the Holy Sword Cliff. However, they could not say anything when they saw so many disciples of the disciplinary hall. Moreover, Sword 11 had been here for 5 days. To be honest, the status of the deacons in Xinjiang Gate was far inferior to the disciples of the disciplinary hall. Moreover, the disciples of the disciplinary hall had the right to arrest people wherever they went. The Holy Sword Cliff was no exception. Some of the deacons could not control and did not want to care about these things. Whoosh whoosh, there were probably dozens of figures landing on the backs of many flying barbaric beasts. Numerous silhouettes landed on the ground. Some were graceful, some were clean, some were domineering, and all of them had extraordinary auras. After which, they quietly stood behind Sword 11. 11th Sword was still sitting cross-legged, and his eyes did not even move. On the Celestial Sword Cliff, people gradually walked out from the densely packed sword caves at the lower end of the cliff. Almost all of these disciples were outer sect disciples. They had calculated the time and would come out of seclusion today. Tomorrow was the Myriad Sword Conference, so they couldn't miss it. They hoped to perform well. But when these outer court disciples left their closed-door cultivation and walked to the square, they saw the dense crowd of figures in the surroundings and an oppressive aura that was tense for no reason. All of them were extremely astounded and utterly didn't know what had happened. At the bottom of the Divine Sword Cliff, in one of the sword caves, the light was much dimmer. Under their gazes from afar, a figure walked out slowly, stretched his waist outside the sword cave, and then walked over slowly. Such a figure had shoulder-length hair, and carried an old and damaged sword that was mottled with rust on his back. He had a handsome appearance, a thin yet tall figure, and it was impossible to conceal the arrogant and evil bearing that was ingrained in his bones. And this person was Sue-E, who had just left his closed-door cultivation. "It's him, that's the kid." "That's Sue-E?" He really came out of his closed-door cultivation. That kid doesn't look very old. Is he really as powerful as the rumors say? As Sue-E appeared, there was an immediate commotion in the surroundings, causing a violent commotion. As he walked closer to the square, Sue-E saw the densely packed silhouettes in front of him from afar. He was a little surprised. Did something happen? And when Sue-E walked closer, he immediately saw a familiar young man in black battle robes and dozens of torture chamber disciples with fierce auras. Sue-E's face twitched, and he immediately understood. He thought something had happened, but it turned out that the 11th Sword was here. Other than him, there was no one else who could have come for him. Since they had already come to find him, there was no way to hide. Swish! Immediately, primordial chi gushed out from the soles of Sue-Yi's feet. With a tap on the ground, His figure leaped out and went directly to Sword 11's side in the square. That tall and thin figure and the broken sword on his back seemed a little out of place, but it also seemed to suit him very well. Just as Su Yi's foot landed, Sword 11's tightly closed eyes suddenly opened at the same time. A dazzling light suddenly gushed out from his cold face. Boom! In an instant, Sword 11's right hand fell and his palm gently patted the ground. A burst of primordial chi gushed out and his body, which was sitting cross-legged, directly rose into the air. Then, his body stood like a wallpaper, and finally, his feet touched the ground and he landed lightly in front of Su Yi. Good, the 11th sword's movements were smooth and cool, causing many people to exclaim in admiration. Senior brother Sword 11 is so handsome. Some female disciples were even stunned and couldn't help but scream. With senior brother Sword 11's help, it's definitely enough to deal with Su Yi. In the crowd, a young man said indifferently with a sneer in his eyes. He was a disciple of the 15th sword peak. Senior brother Sword 11 is not senior brother Huo Dongqiu. I'd like to see how powerful that outer disciple is. There was a young man in the crowd with a cold look. Not long ago, he was taught a lesson by Su Yi in the sword hall. In the midst of the discussion, Sword 11's cold face looked calm. His gray cloak fluttered slightly as he looked directly at Su Yi. There was a kind of coldness in his voice as he said indifferently, "I said you can't escape." Looking at Sword 11's expression, it was not like Huo Dongqiu, Ba Yi, and the other disciples. Su Yi smiled faintly and said, "I never escaped. It's just that you can't catch up. I'm too lazy to fight with you. You are indeed arrogant, but I can still give you a chance. Surrender and follow me back to the torture hall. Otherwise, you will suffer." Sword 11 did not have much of a reaction to Su Yi's words. Su Yi shook his head, looked at Sword 11 and said, "I don't have time to go. I'll go when I'm free. Don't be too arrogant. There is always someone better than you. Huo Dongqiu is not your opponent, but with Huo Dongqiu's cultivation strength, in the entire Xinjian Gate, it's nothing to be proud of defeating Huo Dongqiu," Sword 11 said calmly. Hearing Sword 11's words among the surrounding disciples, some of the disciples of the 15th sword peak suddenly looked a little ugly, but they did not dare to say anything. Chapter 383. Hearing Sword 11's words, Su Yi smiled indifferently. Sword 11's character seemed to be more to his liking than Ba Yi and Huo Dongqiu. Although he was arrogant, at least he was quite straightforward. Most importantly, Sword 11's character was very much to Su Yi's liking. Senior brother Sword 11 will win. Does an outer disciple really want to turn the world upside down? In front of the Holy Sword Cliff, there was a burst of cheers and shouts around the small square. And among them, almost all were the voices of the inner disciples. Many inner disciples had been trampled by Su Yi and lost to an outer disciple. This also made all the inner disciples of Xinjian Gate lose face. Therefore, at this moment, these inner disciples naturally hoped that Su Yi would be defeated. In fact, there were more outer disciples present than inner disciples, but they did not dare to open their mouths to cheer for Su Yi. At this moment, there were many inner disciples present, so the outer disciples did not dare to provoke them. If Sword 11 is defeated, it will be a good show. Senior brother Sword 11 can't be defeated. That guy is just an outer disciple. How can he win against senior brother Sword 11? I guess he will be taken back to the torture chamber soon. It's also impossible. Senior brother Huo Dongqiu was defeated in one move, which proves that Su Yi is really strong. It's not certain who will win and who will lose. In the crowd, there were also some female disciples who were arguing. Many of these female disciples were inner disciples, but their opinions seemed to be divided into two groups. Sword 11's cultivation strength, coupled with his handsome face, had always been very popular among the female disciples of Shinjian Gate. He was the dark horse prince in the hearts of many female disciples. However, looking at Su Yi's tall and straight posture, extremely three-dimensional facial features, deep bright eyes under slender sword-shaped eyebrows, and the complex arrogance in his bones, many female disciples were also attracted to him. In the corner of the crowd, there were a dozen outer disciples standing alone, not daring to get too close. These people were Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and other outer disciples of the 36th Sword Peak. In front of the Divine Sword Cliff, the 11th Disciplinary Hall Sword had waited for 5 days and 5 nights. This news naturally spread to the 36th Sword Peak, which had been paying attention to this matter. That senior brother 11th Sword of the Discipline Hall. I wonder if brother Su Yi can win. If he goes to the Discipline Hall, he'll be in big trouble. I'm afraid he won't be able to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. See 6 Original B version, Chapter section R greater than 06, Zhang Qing whispered worriedly. There was a sea of people in front of them. With so many inner sect disciples present, they did not dare to approach. Now that the 36th Sword Peak was in the eye of the storm, they were afraid of getting into trouble. Su Jiahui didn't say anything. Her eyes were solemn as she observed all the movements in the field from afar. The discussions in the surroundings did not seem to have any effect on Jian Yi and Su Yi at all. Looking at the 11th sword, Su Yi raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "It's true that there's always someone better than you. However, Huadongqiu is not a mountain to me, and I'm afraid you're not one either. If you want to stop me today, I'll defeat you all the same." As he spoke, Su Yi shrugged his shoulders. At the same time, a faint crimson-red yuan qi slowly spread out from his body. The seemingly slow aura actually enveloped Su Yi's entire body in an instant. A vigorous aura mixed with an indescribable pressure pervaded the air. Sensing the aura on Su Yi's body, the originally cold face of the 11th sword seemed to have sensed something. Immediately, it gradually changed. The coldness disappeared and began to become serious. At the same time, there was a faint black earth attribute yuan qi fluctuation on the body of the 11th sword. There was a deep black light flickering in his eyes. At the same time, he looked directly at Su Yi and said, "You seem to have some concealment methods, but you've at least reached the origin spirit stage. You're young, but with such cultivation, you do have the right to be arrogant. No wonder you could defeat Huadongqiu in one move a few days ago." Boom! When the voice of the 11th sword fell, the faint earth attribute yuan qi on his body suddenly trembled. An aura even more vigorous than that of Su Yi rippled out, causing the entire ground to tremble for no reason. The aura was terrifying. Senior brother is so strong. Such an aura surged. There were disciples and the surrounding spectators who exclaimed in shock, their eyes full of awe and admiration. Just by relying on yuan qi, he has such an aura. Yuan qi resonance shaking the earth. I didn't expect the 11th sword to have reached such a level. A group of attendants in a high place not far away muttered, their eyes filled with shock and admiration. Sensing the aura on the body of the 11th sword, Su Yi's eyes moved. Su Yi secretly sighed. The 11th sword was indeed someone that Huadongqiu could not compare with. His aura was concealed to the point where it was difficult to detect. However, he was at least at the 4th level of the origin spirit stage, or else he would not have been able to escape Su Yi's detection. Defeating Huadongqiu in one move. Now, I want to know how many moves I'll need to defeat you. Su Yi's expression also turned serious. The 11th sword before him was indeed not to be underestimated. Among those of the same generation, he was the closest existence to the mysterious young girl from several days ago that Su Yi had encountered. Boom! The aura spread out, but as Su Yi's voice fell, the aura moved again, and was already almost the same as the aura on the body of the 11th sword. Scarlet light lingered, as if there was a ball of fire enveloping Su Yi's body. The light undulated like flames, emitting a scorching aura and pressure. As the auras of the two extraordinary youths undulated, the surroundings suddenly fell silent, and only the yuan qi of the two could be heard. The surrounding spectators began to hold their breaths in anticipation, unable to take their eyes off the fight. The atmosphere in the small plaza was tense and frozen for no reason. Yuan qi light filled the air, as the two pairs of eyes faced each other, their eyes flickering. Then let's see if I'm the mountain in front of you. All of a sudden, the 11th sword moved. His gray robes shook as his figure swept out like a ghost. So what if you're the mountain in front of me? I'll just crush you. At the same time, Sui roared as his figure moved as well. The two of them seemed to have an invisible tacit understanding at this moment, as they attacked at the same time. Plah! The eyes of the surrounding crowd were dazzled as the two figures directly collided. Bang bang bang! Scorching fire attribute Yuan Qi and earth attribute Yuan Qi intertwined. Following which, muffled sounds rang out as gales surged out from the center of the plaza. These two figures were so fast that most of the spectators could only vaguely see two blurry shadows constantly colliding with each other. Then, the two types of Yuan Qi collided, and violent gales swept out like a storm, causing the disciples who were closer to them to have no choice but to retreat. Brother Su Yi, you must hold on. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.